Oh. Oh. What a big screen, isn't it?
It is.
Oh my God. This is tiny. Discussion today. Yeah. Still need some of these things. Oh, there's one. No, Nick's got another lady.
That's why I'm like, that's why.
Sandra, are you on your way to us or at the War Memorial? Oh, okay, so we're at War Memorial. Okay, bye. Okay, we'll see you soon. Bye. Oh, okay, so microphones are very sensitive.
Yeah.
How can you? Okay, I think we'll get started. Kia ora tātou. Welcome to our Climate Action Joint Committee. Tēnei te mihi mahalo, tēnei rā. Matua Roger, would you like to open us with the karakia, please?
Tēnā koe te kia mana, tata katoa e hui nei, tēnei ahi ahi, te mihi atu kia kau te rota kaupapa wānei. Kia ora tātou. Tēnoi tātou, a te matua tama wairua tapa. Āmene. E te matua kaharawa, tēnei matua e whanonga i nei ki a koe. Tō matua hia, kia tata mai koe ki a mātou, e awhina, e ara tapu ki a mātou, i ngā momo kōrero, mahi e mui a mātou tēnei ahi ahi. E te matua, i ngā wākatoa, i mahi ai mātou, hau karori au e tau mō tapu, u hukarare hoki tō mātou ariku. Āmene.
Āmene, kia ora matua. Just a warm welcome, particularly those online. We've got Roz from Wairua. Kia ora, Roz.
Kia ora.
Also, Di joining us. Kia ora, Di. And Nikki, as we come south. Koriana, kia ora, Koriana. First time you've joined us, and you're here with Mana from Ngāti Hineuru, tēnā koutou. We also have Tanya from Maunga Hareru Tangitu. Kia ora, Tanya. And have I missed anyone else on the board? Oh. We will have Sandra join us. She's just on her way. But before then, just like to welcome you all to a very intense afternoon of some really important kaupapa in terms of climate resilience. We have one decision item for item number 4, but Before then, I'm asking the committee to bring items 9 and 10 before that decision item, as it will help us to get through what priority areas we'd like to ask for funding from our partner councils. So I'm getting a bit of a nod. That's Kei te Pai. Kia ora, thank you. Any notices? Yeah, no notices. Any apologies? Alison, there are none. Lateness for Sandra and Tim Aitken is an apology. Thank you. Any conflict of interest declarations? Tanya Eden. Yep. Okay, she's an apology. Yes, thank you. And sorry, Ros?
Mayor Craig Little is an apology too.
Yeah, Craig Little, thank you. And Tanya Kerr. And Michelle is on her way also. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you. There are no conflict of interest declarations for today. Okay, if we turn to our last meeting minutes from the 11th of December, are there any corrections to be made to those minutes? If there aren't any, thank you, Zen. And Annette, happy to second?
Yep.
All those agree, aye, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. We might head into item number 9, which is the Climate Action Plan Risks and Opportunities. So, Desiree, thank you. Please come up. What we have here, team, is an analysis from our tag around, what are the risks and opportunities for our work going forward, to be very pragmatic on the things we can and can't control as a joint committee, knowing we have a vital role to play for the region in this space. Thank you, Desiree and team. We'll hand it over to you.
Right. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Desiree Kell, the Strategy and Governance Manager at Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and we have Paulina.
Kia ora, everyone. My name is Paulina Wilhelm. I'm the Manager of City Development for Napier City Council.
Kia ora, my name is Taylor Eubanks. I'm a Strategic Policy Advisor at Hastings District Council.
Right, so we're representing the TAG who developed this paper. I'll quickly run through the covering report. As you'll remember, at the last Climate Action Joint Committee, the committee adopted the living vision and strategy that's attached to this, and really that set the foundation for this future conversation, which was to identify issues, risks and opportunities around all the 6 PO that are in the living vision and strategy. We really see this as a stepping stone towards an action plan. The risks and opportunities are written, they're not as smart as they would be, perhaps like specific, measurable, achievable, etc., that time bound that they would be as an action, but as a stepping stone towards that, and an opportunity to hear from the committee on where they would like to take it so that we can work on it between now and the next joint committee meeting. One of the key actions was to develop a climate risk assessment, and that relates to the funding decision and the future gap analysis. So yeah, it'll be interesting to hear your conversation. I will maybe let Taylor, Taylor was involved. So we had the Climate Action Joint Committee on the 11th of December, and then the TAG met and we had a sort of facilitated session, a bus stop where we went round and built on those 6 PO, and then there was a smaller subgroup set up to develop this paper. I don't know, Taylor, if you were on that subgroup, if you've got anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I guess it's worth noting that the paper was drafted primarily, so the officers that were involved were from HDC and NCC, and then that was shared with the other members of TAG, and then there was feedback. So this paper is reflecting the feedback of HBRC and the other councils that had an opportunity to feed in. And so that's kind of where this paper sits. So it was just around that timeline that we weren't able to all kind of sit in the room to do that process together. But this is that this draft of the paper is based off of that process.
And yeah, we're happy to take questions and seek your feedback on where you'd like the next step for the action plan.
Yeah, thank you, Desiree and team. I have a question around paragraph or point 7, and it talks to the risk of loss of biodiversity. And obviously biodiversity is one of our key domains, or PO, that we feel we need to get involved in more in terms of support across the region, particularly for projects where we know can make a difference on the ground. So could you talk us through that point and where you see us heading in terms of supporting biodiversity across our region?
Sure. So that's a nice segue. Following this paper, the next agenda item is we've got a terrestrial ecologist and Mark Mitchell, our biodiversity biosecurity advisor, coming to talk about one of the programs that is already underway, which is the Priority Ecosystems program. And that is a good example of a on-the-ground program partnering with private landowners, predominantly farmers, where the remnant forests and wetlands and the high value priority sites are, and what we're doing on the ground. There are other programs underway, but that was really just to give you a teaser of what those other programs are. So I think a role for the committee could be to build awareness of those programs across the region, and then potentially look for synergies.
Yeah, we also, one of the things that we were kind of excited about as a tag was looking for kind of a higher profile anchor project that would work across the region. So a way to build the biodiversity corridor that stretched through the entire region, and ways that that could also be aligned with economic development when you look at tourism opportunities, so that kind of thing. So it was around kind of scoping out opportunities for that kind of project and what might be a good way to do that, and looking at that spatially. So that's the number 14 in those opportunities. So that was one of the areas that we were excited about and thought that that would be like a good project for the joint committee. But a lot of this was around really getting a lay of the land when it comes to that and identifying any gaps and then trying to make that a more collaborative space. So yeah.
I also would like to add as well, from the policy side, Napier City Council has recently reviewed the proposed district plan, and there will be a chapter which is about ecosystem and biodiversities that look to identify those areas and protect them under the RMA as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, team? Roz, your hand's still up? No, that's okay. Annette?
Just more discussion than questions.
Yeah, sure.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the paper tag. One of the things I suppose I was reflecting on when I was reading through the papers was exactly what Desiree just said. What's the role of our committee? And I know that we've had a range of workshops where we've sort of honed that down, and we've now got these PO, those 6 domain areas. But what I was struggling with, I guess, is how to put that into a set of priorities or a couple of key priorities, so that we're not becoming to phrase a better term, a dumping ground for anything climate related, where we distract away and maybe we start collecting data and we start sort of just having information reports about lots of things that are going on in the climate space, but we're not actually actioning anything from the committee space. So when I was reading through, and I really support what you did pulling paper 9 forward, because that sets out, I think, really clearly what those PO are and what opportunities we have. And so I suppose within this paper, through you, Madam Chair, I would be really interested if we could get to a position where we set a couple of key priorities. Maybe it's just for the first 12 months. This is our first our first real full financial year that we're going to be operating in, that we can set those priorities, and I'm happy to talk you through what I think those should be for discussion at the table. But if we set a couple of key priorities through this paper 9, and we set our tag a really clear direction around what we want them to focus on for the next 12 months, in my mind that removes a lot of the noise and a lot of the the work that seems to be sort of piling on this committee, but it's not really necessarily climate action work. So through you, Madam Chair, what I'd like to propose to the committee is that we do have a conversation around what those, say, 2 key priority areas look like for action for the next 12 months, and we push those back to the member councils to support funding in the long-term plan. In my mind, I think it's premature to start building a budget before we've communicated what those priorities are. For consideration, what I'd written down, I believe we should have 2 key priorities for this year, and that those would be one, that we support and publicly highlight a regionally significant climate-related project, and I'd put in brackets biodiversity, because the feedback from all of our workshops was that that was a key priority area. So putting that on the table is something for us to do, to publicly support and gather community interest in a regionally significant climate-related project. And then the second thing for consideration by the committee I thought was important for us is, if no one's having hard conversations about making recommendations on climate action, if it's not us, who's it going to be? And I think it needs to be us. I think we should lend essentially the mana of this committee's voice to other organisations when they're making climate action decisions. So I think in those 6 PO area, we should task TAG to go away and find the most impactful and achievable change that the industries can make in those 6 areas, and we develop recommendations for those decision makers and how to make real climate action change. So we lend our voice to their decision making and we have those hard conversations. So through you, Madam Chair, that's what I would like to propose that we discuss as part of this paper, is actually being really succinct about what we want to do over the next 12 months, and we actually do something with that. So leaving that on the table for discussion. Thank you.
Annette. Thank you for that discussion. Would you like to add to that, Councillor Harding? Then.
Yes, I would. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and through you, and thank you, Councillor Brosnan. And look, I completely support 100% your intent and the desire for action rather than lots of reporting. And the most concerning thing for me in this paper is that it tends to lean towards lots more reporting and talking as opposed to action. The question is, how do we get there and how do we identify what we should focus on? For me, there's a couple of sort of main questions in my mind. One is how we are relating our 6 PO to that, what I understood to be the key task in front of this committee, which is to oversee development of a regional emissions reduction plan. And I'm simply not seeing that in the papers today at all. And that was probably my biggest question coming in today, is where does that sit? Has that been parked, or is this all setting in the, is this all work leading in to a target to have this regional emissions plan by X date? I need to understand that. And the second thing is just the structure of how we're going about addressing each of these PO. And at the moment, it seems to me we have a tag, and all singing, all dancing tag, completely overloaded, but it's a generalist. And for at least some of these tags, they're specific, they're industry related. And what we, in my view, we need to be doing is actually developing individual working groups, call them, they're tags in themselves, but for each of these, we need to have a strategy. This paper states in general terms some aspirations and a way of working potentially. But I think for each of these groups, we need to have a clear strategy about how we're going to engage with that sector that's producing those emissions. And go back to, what are our big emitters? What's our strategy for those? And then from that, what are the initiatives that we can support this year? So that's the way I'd like to get to it. And specifically, I point to primary sector as one where it's not something that can be done by a bunch of generalists. We need to develop a specific group to specifically identify things that may be within, that we can do at a regional level without getting bogged down in the mesh.
Thanks, and can we go back to the question around the regional emissions reduction plan and where that's at?
Sure. Feel free to chip in. So my understanding of the emissions reduction plan is, in the terms of reference, you'll remember there is mention of an emissions reduction plan. Also bubbling alongside that has been this idea of kind of merging the emissions reduction plan and the climate adaptation strategy into one and making it a climate action strategy. So it would be good to get direction from the committee on your preferred approach. Do you want to have a separate regional emissions reduction plan and a regional adaptation plan which follows the national model, or do you want them combined? And both are possible, and there's examples in other regions of both approaches. So you may remember Heather Bosselman and Taylor Heather did some case studies. We looked at the Horizons Regional Council model, and that was combined. And then we looked at another one, which was a separate. So, I mean, it's a little bit operational, but it's quite helpful for us as the TAG to know where to go and how to frame up the work. So that would be helpful. So the working assumption lately has been a combined climate adaptation and emissions reduction. The risk with that approach is that adaptation subsumes emissions reduction, because it's certainly where the central government's pushing us. There's lots of work already in that space with water security, flood risk, coastal hazards, urban planning. A lot of it's around adapting to the risks. The harder conversation is often emissions reduction and what are we going to do less of or change technology. So some direction on that would be quite useful.
Okay, just Desiree, a question. I see that there's a monitoring of regional carbon contributions in your table of funding in item 4 for year 2, 60,000. Is that what that work would pay for?
So no, that is to do the ECOS, no, not ECOS, ICOM report. And the presentation that you've got later in the agenda is Narifa, who's a senior scientist at HBRC, and I think Kozi's going to speak to it, has updated it for the year, but every 3 years we would get ACOM to do a regional inventory stock take.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question there asked of our TAG team on separating those two report mechanisms altogether, if that's still the continued direction of this joint committee. Any thoughts on the two options there? Hayley?
Yeah, kia ora. I'm quite keen to keep them separate. I think, as you say, there is a risk of adaptation overrunning, and it feels like it would just get really murky, and I feel like they're different pieces of work, kind of operationally and governance. So like the way that we prioritize our emissions reduction plan would be under like a cost benefit type scenario. And the way I see us prioritizing the adaptation stuff is more through a risk assessment model. Mm-hmm. And so I think both from a governance and a management perspective, those outcomes are quite separate. So to me, it makes sense that there be two separate lines of work.
Alex?
Feels to me like it's as clear as mud.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not sure exactly what the path forward is. I tend to agree with you, Councillor Brown, about emissions and adaptation having its own space in terms of plans. But in terms of what does this committee govern and what is the work that it does, we still keep coming back to that, because is it that we're governing the regional emissions plan and adaptation plan, or is it that we're providing governance for support of regionally significant hard conversations on climate change? I'm just I'm grappling with that.
Any other questions or comments, Hayley?
I put some thinking into our role, and I see us as having sort of 4 roles, which it'll be interesting to see if this clarifies it all. So we have strategic oversight of the mitigation and adaptation across all of Hawke's Bay. We develop a framework for prioritisation of projects across the region. So in practice, what that looks like is a risk assessment that has the adaptation stuff and then our regional emissions plan for the mitigation stuff. Then we advocate to the appropriate bodies to see actions taken in line with those 2 lots of prioritised projects. And then we support our community through grants and enabling their networking and collaborations to take actions towards climate action. So we don't have to, I don't think as a committee we have to do much. I think we advocate and we push for other people to do it. And I think it's along the lines of what Councillor Brosnan said around having those hard conversations, lending our mana to other people's decisions. Any less murky?
Dan?
George, yeah, look, I endorse what you said, Hayley, and I like the way that you've laid out a couple of different streams, an adaptation stream and a mitigation stream. I think that's helpful because that suggests that we would have goals for both, articulate those and figure out strategies to achieve them. But I think that would be very helpful. It is, the role is multiplicitous, if that's a word. I think the way you expressed it is pretty good, and I think that would be a sound footing for us to plan. My concern about, the question about whether we have one strategy or 2, essentially, is that we have I was comfortable that we have a terms of reference that's pretty clear, because there's a pretty clear focus on mitigations, right? And coming up with an emissions reduction plan. I think that's a really good place to focus, and it's a good test of us. The cyclone and the political winds of the moment are dragging us away from that. That's not a good thing. But we have to walk the line. We cannot walk back from mitigation, right? From reduction. But we have to respect the cyclone and the recovery around that. And so I see us, someone in this region has to advocate for continuing to do the hard work on emissions reduction. And if it's not us, then who? So that, and all this paper, it is continual. It's just, it's reverting to adaptation, and that's what concerns me most. So I think we've got to check ourselves and go, what are our ambitions? What are our goals? And then what are our plans? And we need goals for both adaptation and mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the discussion, Annette Brosnan. You proposed a few focus points, and would you like to revisit those or retable those?
Yeah, I think if the committee is of a mind within this paper to set some clear priority areas, then I think that would be beneficial, and that probably frames up the conversations for the remaining information paper as well, if we've had that discussion. My understanding is through the workshops you've kind of got 90% of the way there, and it probably just needs to be formed into some clear resolutions to provide that guidance back to supporting staff. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an information paper, but I think our TAG would appreciate some clear direction on those priority areas to start working on. And so you've heard climate adaptation and mitigation as separate. You've heard regional emission reduction plans, still really important for this committee to look at, but also you're hearing the biodiversity regional projects that we can support. Hayley.
Just thinking also, we shouldn't lose sight of the work that was already done, that we sort of tabled November last year around the chapters that have already been developed. So there's already really good, well, the startings of great community input into 3 of the chapters, which is waste, transport and biodiversity. So I don't feel like we've already done some of this work, so I don't think it's too much of a leap. Yeah, just thinking that we shouldn't necessarily lose sight of that stuff.
Ben.
Your Chair, yeah, again, Hayley, fantastically put. Look, we already have done a prioritisation. That's the work that we've done, with Carl Wixon. So to be at this point going, well, actually, we've done the prioritisation, now we're going to do a further prioritisation, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. My point is that this is the paper we've got in front of us is the start of some solid analysis on each of the posts, but it's not the end of it. And as Hayley said, there's quite a lot of work that's been done on 3 of them. So we can take that work forward now because we've agreed that they are 3 of the 6 priorities. What about the other 3? And I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that we'd start to whittle that list down further without having done some work on the other 3. And also, I come back to my starting point for prioritisation is, firstly, where are the big problems, and then secondly, where are the big wins, or what can we influence? And so, transport, transport has to be a priority because it's 20%. Primary industry has to be a priority because it's 60-something%. But also, and a point I'm going to get to later on today is embedded, at a regional level. We know nothing about the dynamics from this. This committee knows nothing about the dynamics of our sequestration. The moment we benefit from it, but we have no understanding of that. And if we want to manage or oversee our regional footprint, we're hugely vulnerable at the moment to that. So simply not even scratching the surface of what's driving the net position in our forestry. Anyway, and I'll talk about that more later on.
Hayley.
Just thinking as you're speaking there, Zan, around maybe a bit of a compromise between sort of Annette's idea to get 3 things on the run-in sheet and not missing out on the 6. Wondering, because we've already got 3 chapters that have already got a lot of that work done. There's lots of community consultation. It takes, I'm guessing, a good 12 to 18 months to get to where those papers have got. Whether we took those 3, which are within our top 6, and say within this next financial year, we're going to take the top actions that have already been prioritised in each of those chapters, and we're going to work on the other 3 as we go.
Through you, Chair, I'll just remind you how the chapters were developed. So prior to having a joint committee, we set up a practitioner group, and we developed, we're working towards an emissions reduction plan, and there were a variety of chapters, and then we narrowed, there was nature-based solutions, transport and waste, as you said, that I think we're on the agenda, and then the meeting got made into a workshop. So those actions are sitting there. They've been, assessed for impact and strategic pathway. So but it would need a little bit more work by the TAG because things have changed since we did that work, and they haven't been subject to wider community consultation. So the idea was to develop a draft emissions reduction plan with those chapters, with quite specific actions, and then go out for consultation on it. So we do have those 3 chapters quite well drafted, but they would need to be relooked at and brought up to date. Is that what you're going to say? Yeah. Alex.
Thank you for that description. That was helpful. Just remind me, within those chapters, is there the ability to look at what Hayley described as in the mitigation space kind of cost benefit of actions, and in the adaptation space risk assessment.
So that plan was not focused on adaptation at all. It was solely looking at emissions reduction.
Okay.
And the actions were proposed based off of the discussions that happened within those that panel of practitioners. So there wasn't that full cost benefit analysis on each of those actions. So if that's something that the committee wants to see, that work would need to be undertaken as part of that. And I do want to say that a lot of this focus of this paper was on the adaptation space because of how much work had already been done in the emissions space. We were going to take that work and put them together based off of that feedback that we'd gotten several committee, that it was going to be one action plan. But it is quite easy to separate those out. It just means that we need to revisit the work that's already been done in that emissions reduction space. The risk assessment piece of work is really crucial for that adaptation space because all of the prioritization of adaptation work can only happen once we have a full risk assessment that shows where those biggest risks are. And so, yeah, they don't quite fit together perfectly. And that's, you know, as Hayley pointed out, that that they don't align perfectly when you're looking at it operationally, but that risk assessment will identify all of the risks that are there, and then it will be up to TAG and using experts to identify which within these areas can contribute towards reducing our risk in those different domains. So,
Thank you.
Councillor Brosnan? I suppose I'm just trying to get a hierarchy, Madam Chair, in my mind, and it seems like the sort of regional emissions reduction plan and the adaptation plan are preceding pieces of work to the priority the committee actually want to have, which is around making recommendations on climate action. So you sort of need to get to a certain stage. I think if I'm listening to what Zane's saying, you need to get to a certain stage with those plans where you've covered all of those 6 PO to a degree that you're comfortable to then make recommendations flowing out of them. Would that be fair? Zane?
Sure, yeah, look, yeah, and I think that is fair, but I think probably, you know, there's a parallel process that we could do. I think we've got the 3 strands that have had a lot of work done on them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, it's completely sensible in this year's work plan to dust those off, push them through. Absolutely. What I don't want to do is lose sight of the other things. So I'd be perfectly happy with a work plan that looks like, yes, we're going to push those 3 ahead, but at the same time know what we're doing with the other 3, and be confident that, you know, let's say we're taking a year, so that in a year's time we'd be having this conversation about what we'd achieved with the first 3 and we're ready to springboard the second 3.
Makes sense. All right. Alex?
I just wonder whether so I understand that direction. I wonder whether there is a parallel piece in the risk assessment around adaptation piece, because when I put my Central Hawke's Bay hat on right now, we're missing some granularity of information about what risk assessment means across Central Hawke's Bay. And so that's quite a big priority for us to be able to weigh up how to get into the mitigation space, to actually understand in the risks and costs as well. So it's like we need to have a mitigation and an adaptation strands that are, one will forge ahead of the other at one point, but then we're going to have to keep information coming into both strands of that, I think, for us to continue to move it forward. And there are going to be times when mitigation actions are going to be related to adaptation actions because they cross over. So we're going to have to keep that parallel nature of it, sort of moving it forward step at a time.
Almost like a maturity of, like, we start somewhere and then we just keep maturing it as we go. Yeah.
Look, and in choosing an area to focus on, you're going to work through some but trying to attack it in a structured way, knowing in a way that can be more or less replicated against all those key areas. Is, you know, you will learn quite a lot during that process.
Okay.
Shall we move on from that paper? It was really useful. Kōrero, thank you, to know where everyone's head is at in terms of the 3 streams to forge ahead, 3 to come, adaptation and mitigation within each of the 3. Is that enough discussion on this paper before we move to ecosystem prioritisation, which will help build on the biodiversity home?
There's one other thought that's been sort of playing around in my head around sort of that keeping us at that strategic oversight and not getting lost in projects. So at the moment in our funding paper, we've got it that we're essentially managing that project of filling out all of the hazard, the gaps in the hazard identification. And I've seen it in other committees where you're supposed to have the governance oversight, but then there's a project that needs to be done, it falls on your committee, and then all the focus goes on that and you lose sight of the big picture. So I'm wondering whether that work, so I think 100% it has to be shared services, all of the principles around it. I'm wondering if this committee is the right place to fund it, and is this committee the right place to manage it?
I think we'll leave that to discussion to the funding paper because that's where it sits best. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Hapai, I think we can move on if everyone's comfortable with that.
Just say, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for a little bit more clarity of instruction from us to staff about what we expect to see as a result of this, because the problem is that staff are struggling because they lack a direction from us. And I'm sitting here thinking, what I was hoping to see was a 3-year work plan. And I go, why am I not seeing a 3-year work plan? It's because we haven't sorted out our strategic direction. So I think, we've had a good conversation about a bunch of elements that can stitch together to get more direction, but I think they need to be brought back together in a paper in the next meeting in a more structured way. It says, here's, having heard what the committee's discussed, here's what, here's here's the deliverables that we should think in terms of the emissions reduction plan versus the climate adaptation. Here's what our strategy is for each of the PO, and how that relates to our terms of reference, or whether there's a mismatch.
I think that was the intention but I think the reality is that the 3 months or 4 months between the meeting with that Christmas period, there wasn't enough time for staff to develop a 3-year action plan with all of the different stakeholders. So this risks and opportunities was part of that process with the intention of being able to bring forward a plan that shows kind of what the key projects are that we would recommend. It's just, I guess, the timeline in terms of, when we'll be able to get that. And Desiree, you might have more kind of thoughts on that, but that is the direction that this was supposed to go. This was just kind of a first step so that the committee would have confidence that there was work being done on analysing what those actions might be under those areas that were indicated as being important.
Anything else to add, Desiree? Next steps?
I think if we did aim to bring back a work plan, I think that would be a good step. We are, to be honest, we have been struggling with our niche and our kind of swim lane. So that has been a helpful conversation. And we do need to go and think about how we're going to resource the 3-year work plan. But I think your conversation has helped us see where your priorities are, having 2 streams, I think you called it, of mitigation, adaptation, and moving in parallel. Revisiting the 3 chapters that were already quite worked up and building a strategy for the other 3 is something we could definitely take away and develop further. So,
thank you. Is there confidence around the table that is clear enough moving into the funding paper, which is a discussion itself, but it helps bring some focus before we get there. Thank you, team. We will move on to the Prioritise Ecosystem Program presentation that aligns with what we've just spoken about before the funding paper. So can I please invite Mark and Annabelle?
Kia ora. My name's Annabelle and I'm a senior scientist at terrestrial ecology at the Regional Council.
Yeah, and it's Mark Mitchell. I'm the Principal Advisor for Biosecurity and Biodiversity at Hawkesbury Regional Council.
So thanks for the opportunity to speak today. We're just here to talk a little bit about the Priority Ecosystem Program and that we run at the Council, and some of the links between it and climate change, adaptation and mitigation. And so we'll do that by giving a bit of a background to the program and talk about its delivery and some challenges and potential opportunities. So this graph comes from a report by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment looking at the conversion of farms to forestry, but it captures really well the carbon storage in different ecosystem types. So not just Indigenous, but you can see the power of native forests. So this is tonnes per hectare, so it's kind of standardised. And also our non-forest ecosystems, so some of our coastal ecosystems, and particularly some of the carbon storage that's tied up in our soils. So wetland soils in particular contain a massive amount of carbon. Yeah, so they play a really important role in climate change mitigation. And yeah, just some kind of facts around that. So our native forests across New Zealand cover 7.8 million hectares and store 1.8 gigatons of carbon dioxide, which is massive. And our regional carbon footprint, which I think Kathleen is speaking to shortly, shows that native forest in Hawke's Bay sequesters over 1 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. And yeah, so just to emphasise the importance of non-forest ecosystems, currently drained wetlands and the carbon being released from them is about 1.9 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. So it's important to look after them. So one issue facing our region and right across the country is the impact of herbivores. Obviously, this has a massive impact on biodiversity. If our understory is not regenerating because it's being eaten, we won't have forest going forwards. And there's a lot of carbon tied up in that understory, but probably the bigger impact is going forwards. If we're not getting the big emergent trees being replaced, we're losing a massive amount of carbon storage as well as a massive amount of biodiversity and all the ecosystem that is supported by those different species. So some work has been done looking at Kamahi podocarp forest, which is one of the most common associations around the country. And they found between 2002 and 2014, there was an annual decline equivalent to 3.4 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. And that's most likely due to introduced herbivores, in particular deer and possums. Yeah, so as well as there being the impact on long-term carbon storage, there's also the question of viability of those ecosystems. So obviously we're in the middle of a climate crisis, but we're also in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. This graph is updated constantly by Stats New Zealand based on the threat classification data from DOC. And it shows that more than 75% of Indigenous species in reptiles, birds, bats and freshwater fish species groups are threatened or at risk of extinction. And this is really alarming because a massive proportion of these species are endemic. They're not found anywhere else in the world. And so if we lose them, they're gone forever. There's also, just to highlight on this graph too, the grey parts to the bar, which are data deficient. So for some of these species groups, we don't have a lot of knowledge over how many there are and where they are. And so there's probably actually a higher proportion of threatened species than we currently realise. So a lot of this, sorry, a lot of this biodiversity loss is obviously due to habitat decline. This is an image from our most recent State of the Environment report. So in Hawke's Bay, only 34% of the Indigenous ecosystem, so not just forest, covering the region before human occupation remain. And probably one of the key things to point out is that this loss continues. Between 1996 and 2018, across New Zealand, not just Hawke's Bay, there was an estimated 44,800 hectares of Indigenous forest, scrub and shrublands lost. We are continuing to clear in many areas across the region. And much of what is left of this is subject to a range of pressures, so pest plants, browsers and predators, and obviously climate change. So to do something about this, in 2016, there was the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Strategy. So this was developed in partnership with a number of other agencies, including a lot of people in this room, I'm sure. And as part of this, there were some key steps to kind of focus restoration activities and look at where we were going to have the biggest impact in halting biodiversity decline. And Biodiversity Hawke's Bay continues to play a massive role in facilitating relationships in this space. So to kind of focus our resources and get the best bang for buck, a process of ecosystem prioritisation was done. So a model was made to map potential ecosystems. So this was based on things like climate and soil, to kind of predict what forest and other ecosystem types are likely to be present today if there were no humans. And then that was overlaid with the land cover database to understand what we have left, so the degree of loss for the different ecosystem types, and to help us understand where we really needed to focus our resources to protect what we have left. So to build on this, zonation was used, which is a conservation planning tool. This has been used by most regions around the country, and it kind of, you feed it a cap, so 30% was decided upon, and that's based on the species area curve, which shows the white arrow is kind of if you lose 10% of your species when you've got a higher proportion remaining, it's not such a drastic impact as when you're down into your lower numbers, and then losing 10% is massive. So it took that into account to give a list of prioritised sites, and then fed in some criteria around mainly representation. So there was a focus on the ecosystem types where we've lost the most, as well as connectivity and condition. And it came up with the priority ecosystem sites, so our top 30% of remaining Indigenous vegetation. And the aim is to protect this and ensure its ongoing ecological integrity. So there's 677 sites across the region. There's an emphasis on sites where there's a freshwater connection, because that means there's more representativeness. A lot of these sites are quite small in size, and a lot of them are on private land. And like any model, the results need to be interpreted with care, and this is a factor in delivery of the program. But I don't want to go into the detail too much. I just want to emphasise that there is a really robust process behind the selection of these sites. And I also just wanted to quickly highlight a couple of our ecosystem types which are really, really under threat. So less than 2% of their historic extent remains. So one of them is Totara Matai ribbonwood forest, and we only have 1.2% of its original extent. And most of this forest was riparian margins, particularly in the Tukituki and Ngāruaroa catchments. And just to emphasise too that a lot of these ecosystems have not only been dramatically reduced in extent, but much of what is left is highly degraded. So it's even more important to look after. And then another one, Kahikatea Forest, we've only got 1.3% remaining. And this is a picture of one of the sites that has been managed through the Priority Ecosystem Program, and we were there in December and it's looking really good, but a lot wetter than it does in this picture. And then Kahikatea Pukatea Forest is quite similar to Kahikatea Forest, but Pukatea is not normally found where the moisture deficit is seasonally high, so it kind of links into that climate and soil. So those ecosystem types would be a real focus. So just to talk about the operational delivery of the program. So it was established as part of the long-term plan in 2018. And it is based on having partnership with private landowners. The funding is used for on-the-ground action, particularly deer fencing and pest control. And it has been an amazing opportunity to leverage funding. So Jobs for Nature through the Department of Conservation and the Freshwater Improvement Funds through the Ministry for the Environment have really accelerated delivery in some parts of the region. The map up on the screen shows the 25 sites being actively managed this financial year. So there's a range of different things happening in these sites. Some of them are being fenced, some of them have deer control, some of them have goat control, some of them it's pest plant control, and quite a few of them it's a combination of all of those. And the Priority Ecosystem Program is one of many different work streams at the Council, as Desiree mentioned, that are increasing biodiversity outcomes. So the team work in partnership with a lot of other people across Council. And these are a few examples of some of the sites where we've been working. So as you can see, the picture on the left has had deer in it for a very long time, and there's not a lot coming up, and a lot of those stems in fact are horopito, which is really unpalatable and deer wouldn't eat. So that site has now been deer fenced, and there's really good diversity in the seedlings coming up. So hopefully over time, with the ongoing protection from browsers, that one's going to do really well. And the site on the right is a picture of a deer fence, and that's one down near Parongaho, which has, is a super cool site with lots of different diversity in it. The picture on the left is a big wetland near the Naruroro River. So this has a really good understory of Indigenous species, lots of different caricases and ferns, but was completely dominated by willows on top. And it was quite a challenge for the team, this one, because they wanted to protect that understory while controlling the willows and allowing it to really flourish. So that was a pretty exciting one. And then the one on the right is near the Wairoa River, and that's had a whole lot of different weed control, particularly pampas, going on, as well as just having a deer fence around it too. So some of the challenges to the program obviously are the ongoing maintenance. So this was one site which was quite heavily impacted by Cyclone Gabrielle, and same with pest plants as well. It's not enough to just go in and do it once. You have to keep following up, and there's obviously cost associated with that. The cost of doing some of this work is massive. Fencing is really expensive, and the cost keeps going up. And the scale that we need to do it at. So at the moment, we can do a few sites really well, but there's so much potential to do so much more across the region. And just to kind of bring back to those links to climate. So obviously there's some massive overlap between the climate and biodiversity crises, and aligning work between climate change and biodiversity is a huge opportunity to really make a difference in both these areas. If we have healthy functioning ecosystems, we will have more resilience to extreme events. Wetlands play an amazing role in storing sediment and slowing down flood waters. And so I'll just make sure. And we also need to make sure our response to the climate crisis improves resilience of native ecosystems. So especially in the coast, where if there's going to be retreat, ecosystems have the space to retreat as well. And things like nature-based solutions are a massive opportunity to build on existing programs that are already having really good outcomes to have even bigger outcomes. And that's the end.
Thank you, Annabelle and Mark, and also acknowledge Ian Maxwell here at the back, the GM of this fantastic team. Thank you for your presentation, but also just, you know, the linking in with those priority areas and actually the need to want to do more. So I think we've got to heed that call in this forum. We know you're doing some great work, but the scale of it means you need assistance where you can. So we're here to do that. So I'll just take questions and comments. This helps really inform our next paper as well. So thank you very much. Mayor Alex.
Awesome report, thank you. And the places that I've seen this work on the ground, they're so proud of the impact they're having, not just for themselves, but for the wider ecosystem and biodiversity of the region. It's very, very impactful. It's very cool. I did want to ask you about the planning instruments that exist across the region within district and regional plans that help in this space. And I'm asking because Central Hawke's Bay's new plan, which is nearly fully operative, features significant natural areas, and just wondering where you think across the region how we're getting that mix of planning protections in place to support that work.
Yeah, slightly challenging. I'm not all over all the policy, but in regards to SNAs, there was the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity that's now been paused. However, I know local authorities have either gone through that process or are still intending to, if they have started. That, I guess, helps manage deforestation. It helps prevent those forests from being chopped down or burnt or whatnot. They don't help, I guess, protect them from all the pests that are out there. And I think it would be very unfair to require landowners to take on all those challenges, to have to try and fence all these areas, to remove all the pest plants and the pest animals. So that's where council comes in to work with them in a partnership, and it very much is a partnership. So the landowner is obviously giving up their land alongside helping contribute towards the costs, and we come along and assist in paying nearly up to 90% in some circumstances to help get this work done for the very acutely and chronically threatened ecosystems. Often it's just the financials, it's a cost barrier that prevents these sites from being protected. So I guess policy does help stop vegetation loss, but it certainly doesn't stop the ecosystem from degrading over a longer period of time due to the pests. So that's where our program steps in.
Cool, thank you.
Zane.
Sure, Chair. Thanks, team. It's never a bad day to think about biodiversity, and you cannot think about climate crisis without thinking about biodiversity crisis. Great opportunity with you here to get your opinions, and they'll be maybe your own, not necessarily an organisational opinion, on the challenge. This community, ultimately, I boil down the role of this Joint Action Committee as being responsible for regional emissions reduction, overseeing regional emissions reduction. We have to do that. No one else is doing it, and it's, if not us, then who? Thinking at a regional scale, there are a lot of sources and, well, a lot of challenges to carbon sinks that you mentioned, and sources in that graph of carbon storage. Above ground and below ground was a very interesting example. At scale, what can we do? What's your advice about what we can do at scale to either save the carbon we have or sequester more, please?
challenging. I think one thing we could do is pest management, but that's a massive cost. So feral deer are a massive issue in our region, and we are actively managing that where we can through fencing and removal. However, they cover a large area, and that not only affects native, it actually affects pine plantations and whatnot as well. So it's a shared concern alongside Department of Conservation as well, of which the management currently sits. So possums are another one. They affect carbon absorption massively through obviously eating many palatable species. We currently are very blessed to have the possum control program in Hawke's Bay, which already manages a lot of that. So we are already doing quite a bit, which is great. In regards to moving forward, we had a solution. I guess we'd fund it and crack into it, but I'm not sure what else. Someone, Annabelle.
Yeah, I just emphasise too the importance of protecting what we have left, because I think a lot of the time energy gets focused on planting, which is massive and really important too, and not to take away from that. But the amount of carbon caught up in those massive trees, it's going to take hundreds of years to be able to recreate that. And equally for our wetlands, where often, you know, people maybe don't feel quite so excited about some of them, but there's a massive amount of biodiversity there, and there's a massive amount of carbon in the soils. And I guess it's the combination of, for those protecting those areas of the regulatory, like you've just mentioned, and the non-regulatory, like the program, that hopefully is going to move things forward. But yeah, it comes back to that whole scale again when you're.
Thank you. Look, one of the reasons that was a slightly leading question, because I was hoping we'd get to talk about some of those big, you know, what that carbon, as you said, Annabelle, the carbon that's at risk at the moment, and in the way you described the state of much of our DOC estate as being as regressing. Now it's losing carbon now. So not only will it lose carbon, it will lose soil, and that soil ends up down on the plains, and we understand that intrinsically now. So I just wanted to, this is a great opportunity to have the committee think that, you know, we can do with it, whether it's within our TLA or the regional council area active interest, we have to be thinking about the whole, the carbon source and sinks for the whole region. And actually, if we want to be effective, you know, if we want to achieve anything at scale, of scale, then it needs to be at scale. That's the point, and we can't lose sight of that. So that means private land, it means DOC estate, it means urban as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Zan. Alex. Yeah, Alex. Or did you? No, okay.
In terms of the funding sources that you're using for this work, is this alongside Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, or is it separate from it? And have they got funding sources to be supporting this work as well, or are you doing it in mutually exclusive but talking?
Yeah, so it's in partnership. So we have a priority ecosystem fund that Hawke's Bay Regional Council holds, and we have I think it's 3 biodiversity advisors in the team who work with private landowners, but we also work in partnership with Biodiversity Hawke's Bay in regards to communicating with the community in regards to finding sites, knowledge transfer, and we also work in partnership with them in a community fund that we run each year as well, but we are funded separately.
So the community fund is your fund, or it's Biodiversity Hawke's Bay?
It's Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, of which Hawke's Bay Regional Council is one of the contributors of that. Yeah.
Okay. I asked that question because in Central Hawke's Bay we have put in place significant natural area policy in our new district plan, and we're considering what other incentives and support could go alongside that. It's possible to do things like rates remission on areas like SNAs, because we do it on QE2 blocks, for instance. But exploring, actually, it's technically quite difficult to do the rates remission part across SNAs because they can be small and they're quite fragmented. So exploring if we're going to incentivise, well, where could we provide additional funding or partnership or support to get alongside that work. So thank you.
Yeah,
That's really
biodiversity
helpful.
today would be a good one. Yeah.
Thanks.
Councillor Brosnan.
I didn't actually have my hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Just being cheeky.
Ros.
Yeah, thanks. Just great presentation. Fully, really on board with it all. Just wanted to sort of share. My husband and I, we are part of the Land for Life program, which is a lot of the work that you have just talked about in the presentation we've done. We've just locked up 32 hectares of bush, deer fenced through this program, and it would never have happened if we didn't have the help from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, because the funding, in terms of fencing, I think for that 32 hectares, it was going to cost us 120,000, which just is pretty hard in this farming climate to sort of cover that. But we've now locked that up. It's been locked up for 2 months, and the growth, undergrowth in that bush is just dramatic already. So I just fully support what it's doing, and I totally agree. Everywhere you look in Hawke's Bay, you see bits of native bush, and they're never going to recover because they're always going to be grazed. So, 10, 15 years time, we're going to lose those trees and we're going to be poorer. So in terms of biodiversity, particularly when I look at this area around here, I do see it as a great priority, and for this committee to be, thinking seriously as a big commitment forward.
Thanks, Ros. Thanks for sharing that, and brilliant work on your farm and the successes you've got there. It's a great example. Thank you.
Just one more thing, just in terms of Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Environment Waikato, they help farmers a lot with water reticulations systems in their farms, and they help fund with water reticulations. And I think that I don't know what Hawke's Bay Regional Council offer in terms of that, but I think if we're wanting to be serious about protecting our waterways, particularly for farming, we should be looking into how we can help farmers to get better water schemes on their farms.
Yeah, thanks, Ros. I've just got a nod from Ian. We do, so maybe we can connect you two on the opportunities going forward.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep. Bye. Any other questions or comments? There are none. Thank you both for your great presentation. And can I have a mover and a seconder of this item and the last item, please? Alex and Sandra, thank you. All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Fantastic. That leads us into the item number 4, the funding update paper. So can I invite Desiree? You're leading us on this. And Pippa. Great, so you have some options for us based on the last committee meeting and some pieces of work identified.
Yeah.
Also to you, Pippa, said to hear that you're heading back to France, to your husband's homeland. So we will miss you, and this is your last meeting, Joint Climate Action Committee meeting.
But I'm still here for a couple of months, so there's still work to be done. Well, there'll always be work to be done. Sorry, I'll just be able to share that online. I'm sharing the right thing. So yes, you have the paper, which the discussions you've had already this afternoon have moved the topic on a little bit, but the paper that we put to you for funding was a result of the discussions at the December meeting, the 11th of December, where we put a budget to you that was an overall budget of $690 spread over 3 years. At that meeting, we talked about the share between the partner councils, what the work plan was, and there was a request for a little bit more detail. And so what has moved on since then is a funding split was agreed between the chief executives, and the chair and deputy chair of this committee then wrote to all mayors of the councils to request that funds be allocated in the long-term plans on that funding split basis, which is 26% for the 3 larger councils and 11% for the 2 smaller councils. Then as TAG at our meeting in February, we talked about gaining a bit more information and idea of when the costs would fall and how the type of work we would be doing. Now, we have always signalled that it is a really bare bones budget. So with that in mind, not wanting to increase that overall amount of 690 over 3 years, we feel that there was a request from this committee to progress the climate change risk assessment for the region, and that could have a very significant cost. So to do that, this funding paper proposes that we bring in more money against that item, the climate change risk assessment, and that we move those funds up into the first year. I don't have the table. You have the budget table, the proposed budget table in the paper. And actually, we should acknowledge also the help of Dylan Mugridge, who actually wrote most of this paper, but can't be with us today. He's involved in another hui. So yeah, that's the kind of summary of what we're proposing in this paper, to put more money against the climate change risk assessment and to bring that further into the first year. The other items I can just give, because there was a question earlier on the carbon footprint. So the table I'm referring to is the table in option 2, the preferred option. That's on page 3. And the carbon, the regional carbon footprint that we'll present to you briefly later, we can do a lot of that work internally, but if we do want an externally validated, that comes with a cost of external consultants. So what we're proposing is that work would be done every 3 years, so that we have a report that's able to be published, and that is around $60,000 every 3 years. So that's that item there. The others, I think, are self-explanatory, apart from this climate change risk assessment. The climate change risk assessment also, one of the stepping stones to that is the paper you have later on the agenda with the gap analysis of what do we currently know about our hazards, how confident are we, or what's our geographical spread, how old is the data, so where might we prioritise the money to commission some new data. So I do take Councillor Brosnan's point. I think that it is difficult to make budgetary decisions when we are still developing the work plan, and getting an idea of what is possible with the resourcing of this committee.
Thank you, Pippa. I think a lot of it's self-explanatory, but there's that question of climate change risk assessment, I think, which is a larger one that we need to discuss on whether it belongs through this committee, or actually we take it back to TAG to talk with the CEOs on where the best place for that piece of work should sit, given it crosses civil defence and across the KEG group of our councils. So if we can have some comment on that and other elements of the option put forward. Councillor Brosnan.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for that acknowledgement, Pippa. I would support your line of thinking on that, Madam Chair. I think we're at risk if we take on this piece of work of being that committee, as Councillor Brown so accurately said, that ends up doing a whole lot of stuff which is possibly BAU for our partner councils to work on, or partner organisations and those reporting to it, like civil defence. So yeah, I would support that our funding for this committee be focused on those priority areas that we're going to work through in those strategic plans. And yeah, and I think from my perspective, it's sad not to have in the first year of budget some work around supporting and highlighting regionally significant projects that take action on climate. So I suppose I'm just wondering if it's required to go into this level of detail at this stage, or whether or not we could have a higher level budget. All of our partner councils have obviously, through their CEs, agreed a funding split for that, and we've now got some clearer priorities we can push back to our member councils, which should allow that to go through LTP. Yeah.
Further comments? Thank you, Sandra. Mayor Sandra.
Thank you, Cheers. Yeah, I think we're at a risk of, if we don't undertake this work at this time, then who is going to do it? And I think it's critical post Cyclone Gabrielle that we're showing some leadership here, that we are getting this work done. I support the recommendation here. I think that it needs to be independent of CEDAM. I think that this is absolutely critical work at this time. So I support the TAG recommendations, and I support, and yes, I agree with Deputy Mayor, and I think that we have to have some actions. We're 18 months into Climate Action Committee. We have to show some leadership and actions. But for me, this is absolutely critical after what our community experienced in the last year. So, I support that.
Thank you. Mayor Alex?
I think we should also be contributing to this collection of data. I think it's quite important. The piece about the ownership of the data and where it sits is, I do think that maybe we're not the ones to own it. I think the regional portal that currently is being set with civil defence is where that hazards management is, but there's clearly a gap. That gap analysis paper is actually really good. It gives us an opportunity to advocate back into that risk identification part of civil defence, that this is what needs to be done, but actually we're willing to, with a climate change lens, put our money where our mouths are to get that piece of work underway and done. I don't think the paper's really clear enough about where those roles and responsibilities of civil defence sit. And the other thing is, and I think it would be helpful to clarify that, the other thing is, I think it's a mistake for us not to have a line there around comms and engagement. Some of these actions for us to provide leadership are actually really importantly sit in the telling the stories space and in that advocacy space. And I think it's a shame to not have that in the option. So if I would change the option, it would be to do that. And to use that to be able to move forward from there. And that risk assessment is going to help us mapping the mitigation and adaptation strategies as well. It's actually a core piece of work for that too. So I think that we need to invest in this risk assessment work.
Any further comments?
Yeah.
Councillor Harding?
Chair, I just say that I'm relaxed about where this lands. I'm heartened by the comments of the mayors of the value of the work from a regional point of view. My greatest concern is to see that the oversight of the project is by those who will use the data, the output of it, because I worry that we could end up, if it's disconnected, then it will not give the information that we need, but also that we could spend years on data collection that's of no or of diminishing returns in terms of value. So governance, whether it it would be unfortunate if in funding this it stopped us doing core work on PO. That would be a bad result, and that I don't think we let that stand. But yeah, sort out the governance of this project, get it going.
Rose?
Yeah, same, I agree. Like, I think the data collection, we don't need a whole lot more of it. And I think in terms of getting some actions done would be really good to see as from this committee. And I'm also in agreement with Mayor Walker in the fact that there should be some budget put in for public communications. I think we need to, within this committee, share some good news stories that are happening within our region and taking a positive approach to the whole matter.
Thank you, Rose.
Thanks.
Any further comment? Okay, so what we've sort of heard here is the climate change risk assessment work needs to happen. We need to get on with that as a region, but as a high level, there needs to be a bit more work on who's the role and responsibility of that being done. But obviously, this committee would like to see the progression of that work and understanding of that work. We are looking for more around public communication being put in here as a high level budgetary item, and every other item everyone feels quite comfortable with at a high level knowing that when we go through LTP, these exact numbers may not be reflected as they are in this paper, but in principle supporting the direction. Is that the feel that I'm getting from the room? Yep.
Just also the point around, it's sad that at the moment there's nothing in there for community grants in the first year. How you magic more money into year one again, but
I think it's in any year, sorry.
Through you,
Sandra,
Chair,
yes.
Can you just explain to me what community grants, where they come from? That community project applies for adaptation project?
Yeah, this was an early proposal put at the first time we presented the budget in December, and the request was made in December to for the staff to do some scoping work about what grants exist already in this environment, broader environment space. So we've done that piece of work and identified that there are no tagged grants for climate action with the words climate. There are planting grants, like through biodiversity. There are council grants to green up urban spaces, for example. But there's nothing that might help, for example, in adaptation, a community group who are concerned about, say, coastal erosion and want to talk about some of the actions that they might take, so sort of short term to mid term to long term. And there are no regional climate grants. So this was an idea that it could support either mitigation actions, say active transport options at a community level, or adaptation. This kind of grant is used successfully in Bay of Plenty. And I think there's another council. So that was, yeah, we were working up a proposal, but then because it does need to fit within this budget, we're struggling to find the money. But if there's an appetite for that, the council officers have developed some information and some proposals if there's an appetite for a regional community climate action grant.
Through you, Chair. Our council has the opportunity for all communities to come in and seek funds through the annual plan. Projects underway at the moment, nourishment, etc., that directly funded through our annual plan.
Yes.
So I think that, we kind of covered off in a lot of those areas. We contribute to a lot of groups in a lot of areas we're wanting to do this work, particularly in our rural community and also in our coastal communities. So, all these areas we're working moment, so I'm not sure we need another community fund. So I'm okay with the intervention. But I do agree with me, Walker, that the communication engagement is critical. And I also would like to see that the Regional Recovery Agency is sort of has an overview as we look at some of the recovery stuff. So in terms of new risk modelling for the future and how that circulates into our knowledge through our various works in the PLA, that they have an overview on what we're looking at here too. That risk modelling is something that we have to be alert and open to for any future, both residential and industrial expansion. So it sort of morphs into future development strategy. This is critical work to give effect to how we plan for the future. So that's why I think it would give this committee some real money actually doing this.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra. Councillor Brown.
I sort of had a slightly different view on that than the staff just gave. I think one of the things that Carl talked about is with our climate mitigation work, we're not looking to do council activities, we're looking to start a movement. We're looking to move our communities to reduce their emissions, not just councils reduce council emissions. And so that money for me is about, I think, because we are the stick in so many situations, if we try and be the carrot, we will fail. So this was about us enabling community organisations to do the work, and it's got their branding on it and it's their project, but we support and encourage that way. So that was where I saw, and like tied to our PO as well. So we would support a biodiversity initiative, a waste reduction initiative, something in transport. That was how I saw that. That little 30,000 that's not going to go very far. But yeah, that was the idea of that line item in my head. So.
Okay, so we've got option 2 and we've just discussed those high level areas to take forward to our councils to include in our LTP. Any further discussion on that so that we can move that paper along? There are none. Councillor Brosnan?
Yeah, I still think until we've completed our priority work that we should take the high level budget back to our partner councils, and we can do a further piece of work on what that split of budget looks like at our end. But I think if we've agreed the funding split with the chief executives, we've agreed sort of the general per year budget, then the actual detail of what we can achieve within each of those financial years, I'm not sure that's required at a line level within each council's LTP. So
agreed.
I'd like to keep some flexibility, I suppose, in it.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Next steps, Pippa and Desiree.
Yeah, sure. I was just I was thinking, as you've been talking about, I think there is an opportunity to go back to the councils and see, particularly in the infrastructure groups, what budget they have to contribute to a climate risk assessment, and maybe we can make the money go further if we can tap into some existing budgets. And so I quite like the idea of it's agreed at about 690 for the 3 years. The real the deadline was to try and get something into LTPs. That's what was pushing it, and we can take it away and work within that envelope and what we can get best bang for buck.
Could we have some communications across the joint committee when that piece of work's done, so we're all aware of heading into LTP, what is being discussed at the CE sort of program level? Sure. Almost as a follow-up to this paper.
Okay. Yeah. And I also wonder, where was I going to go with that? The funding's agreed. The main thing is we've got ring fence dedicated funding for this climate, and that's a step forward.
Yes.
And if we can build in a comms component, I think that would, pay dividends. And as we develop the work plan more, the budget will also evolve out of that.
Thanks, Desiree. Ros? Was that your hand up still? No, it's done. Okay. All right. Could I have a mover for that resolution, Mayor Sandra? Sorry, and a seconder, Alex?
Yep.
Great. All those who agree? Yes.
Just speak to the motion, please. I think there's an issue.
There's an issue? Okay, would you like to raise the issue?
So the point is we just need clarity on the recommendation to talk about option 2, which includes the detail, and it isn't evenly split. It's loaded towards financial year 25-26. So I'm just seeking clarity. I think where we'd landed was that we were just agreeing a 690 spread equally across 3 years and not the detail. So
yes,
the motion needs to reflect that. That's all.
Yes.
I think that's
we discussed the high level over the 3 years, year 1, year 2, year 3, adding communication engagement into that.
Okay, so that's the old
That's where we
recommendation 3. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Right.
All those who agree? Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I just, an observation on that community grants conversation that we just had, where that's actually the opportunity for us as a committee, if that bit of work around gap analysis has been done, for us to actually go back to our partner territorial authority councils and say, would be really great if you could look at this councils and where you've got community funding grants and make sure that it covers climate action as part of what you're supporting community to do in those in your community funding options, that's some way that we can be asking partners to be contributing to that, because we've got one and it talks about environment and sustainability, but it doesn't actually use the words climate action. So maybe let's take a position. We could advocate that from here, that it's important.
Yeah, that's great point. Thank you.
Could I make a short point?
Yep.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion, I think, by Mayor Walker, because it's sometimes just around the wording of it or the strategic kind of direction of the funding. For example, you'll be aware of ECCT, Eastern and Central Community Trust. They've recently redone their funding strategy, and climate will now be a key PO for them. And so it's not necessarily creating a new thing or putting more money, it's just strategically directing those funds to where we want it to go as a good way forward.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, team. We got through that one. We have Horticultural Climate Change Resilience Research Project. So please, we invite Pippa, would you like to lead us in this one? Thank you.
Absolutely, I'll just join the meeting.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce Luke Mearson, who is Business Development Manager from Plant and Food New Zealand, right? You're based in Hawke's Bay, but your role, as you're telling me, is national and international.
Yes, yeah.
So it's our third time lucky, I think, on getting Luke to present to us today. So we're really pleased to have him here to talk a lot about the research that Plant and Food is doing to prepare for this future climate that we might see in the region. So you're joining.
Kia ora, welcome, Luke. Thanks for being here with us.
Yes, kia ora. I'm just joining now so I can share my presentation. Thank you all for the privilege to speak today. I was mentioning to Pippa, I was actually part of the Hawke's Bay Youth Environment Council back in the early 2000s, so I feel like I'm doing my young self.
Yeah. So you've come back and forth.
I'm honouring him by being here, so it is an honour. Thank you. So now if I can get the tech working. Let's see. There we go. So my presentation topic is slightly different than introduced, but I think hopefully it is well-rounded and will give you guys a bit of insight into the work that Plant and Food Research, or Rangihoahu Maru Kai, is doing at the moment in New Zealand and abroad, importantly. So I often think before you hear someone talk, it's nice to know a little bit about them. So my introduction is that I am from Hawke's Bay. I grew up in Taradale and went to St. John's College, studied law and biomedical science in Victoria, Wellington, before moving down to Canterbury to help with the earthquake rebuild, where I worked in the legal and strategy and governance areas. Then on to Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and New Zealand Customs Services as a lawyer. I've been at Plant and Food Research for 5 years now and am the sole Senior Business Development Manager. I'm charged with helping link networks around the world to commercialise the outputs of our many plant breeding programs. So there's a focus both domestically and internationally on that. And I'm passionate about innovation's role in mitigating the climate crisis. So as I said, it's an honour to be invited to talk. Today I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Plant and Food Research for those who might not know the organisation very well. Then I'm going to talk about the challenge that you're all too familiar with, but that is that of plant breeding and food production in the time of climate change and uncertainty. I'm going to provide a brief snapshot of what we're doing and focusing on a case study that we call the Hot Climate Partnership, and then talk about some of our other resilience work. So things like plant breeding, a new initiative called Authentic Taonga Foods, and our cyclone response. So Plant and Food Research is a Crown Research Institute, and our core purpose is to enhance the value and productivity of New Zealand's horticultural, arable, seafood, and food and beverage industries, and to contribute to an economic growth and environmental and social prosperity of New Zealand. Under our new CEO, Mark Piper, we are currently undergoing a strategy refresh that will probably refine our core purpose. And I wouldn't be surprised if climate was a closer focus of that. I come from the Hawke's Bay site, which is out on the corner of St George's and Crosses Road in Havelock North. We're around 70, sometimes up to 100 seasoned staff, focusing on breeding, bioprotection, plant physiology, all sorts of plant science topics, you name it, and that site basically does it. You'll know us for apples probably, but we also do wine grapes, vegetables, all sorts of summer fruit and berry. At its core, our organisation focuses on the breeding of plants, fish and foods, on providing sustainable, resilient food supply, and on really stretchy blue sky science, the type of science that we might see implemented in 20, 30, 50 years. We don't just breed plants in New Zealand, and we don't just breed apples. We also breed famously kiwi fruit, pears, grapes, black currants, kumara potatoes, hops, berry fruit, arable crops. We even breed dragon fruit in Vietnam. And there's many more I probably haven't mentioned. Some of our breeding is done through core funding of our organisation. Some of it we bring partners along the way. Key to this is the output of varieties that we can put in the hands of growers, and they can be more tolerant to different conditions and provide them with a higher orchard gate return. Some that you might know are Zespri Gold and Ruby Red kiwi fruit, Wake raspberries, which are extremely popular in the United States, Envy apples, Moonlight potatoes, and Conquest wheat. So we talk about a smart green future together. And part of that together is working with what we call sister or brother organisations around the world to breed plants suited to different climate conditions. So I've mentioned dragon fruit in Vietnam. That was an MFAT co-funded program initially to help Vietnamese growers who are struggling with disease pressure. That's been extremely successful. We also work in the north of the United States breeding raspberries for their particular conditions, which we have brought back to New Zealand to a level of success. We breed apple rootstocks in China for their particular climate conditions. And importantly today, I'm going to focus on the work we've done in Catalan, Spain, breeding apples and pears. So I'm sure many of you are aware of the impact of the changing climate on the various crops that we breed within Hawke's Bay, especially, you know, whether it's feeds, forages, fibre, and of course fruit. Combined with the increased weather pressure we've seen, production systems are under heavy scrutiny at the moment for their carbon emissions. Agricultural and horticultural emissions are expected to be at around 15 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalents by 2050. The target to stay below 2 degrees global warming was 4 gigatons. So at the moment, we're well overshooting that. We see our role as incredibly important to breed cultivars that are require less input or zero input, are highly productive, and are resilient to the changing climate. Food demand in the year 2050 is going to be approximately 52% higher than the current global food production. So all the while needing to mitigate our emissions, we are needing to produce more, which is the challenge that we're inherently focused on. Again, none of this image will be overly unfamiliar to you, but speaking personally, it's important for me to remember that I have a young daughter and a son to be born in 1 month, and the work we do here is going to be for them. They'll be 80-ish in the year 2100. So, excuse me. That's all for them ultimately. So climate change adaptation research at Plant and Food Research, we focus on 4 major areas. As I've heavily referenced, we're breeding climate-ready cultivars. We're also looking at how we can ensure production in the changing and volatile environments of the future. Increased weather pressure will bring increased pest pressure. So biosecurity is a huge part of what we're looking at. And adapted supply chains is another thing that we are focusing heavily on. We are seeing over time an increasing number of our projects focusing on climate change adaptation. And as new projects launch now, we are ensured that climate resilience is a part of the core focus of those projects. So when we look at the horizons of climate change adaptations, we see things like high-level work, so tactical adaptations. This is, we may suggest to a farmer or a grower a different variety for a different weather system. That's the kind of stuff we can do now because we have a range of varieties available. We have scientists who can look at things like weather patterns and rainfall and produce results right now. We also do work for strategic adaptation. So this is more of a significant thing. It's more likely to require long-term planning and high levels of investment. And that's something like shifting from a monoculture crop on a farm to a diverse cropping system and integrating systems that ensure biodiversity is present on the orchard. And then we look at transformational adaptation. So this is the type of thing that we have PhD students in Hawke's Bay looking at in 20, 30, 40 years' time, how successfully can we grow certain crops in Hawke's Bay that are very successful now, thinking pip fruit, and looking at other regions of New Zealand and seeing, is there potential in Canterbury to start growing apples soon? So our overall goal in the breeding space is to produce climate resilient cultivars of plants and fish. We also breed fish down in Nelson. Hot climate apples are our North Star when it comes to breeding climate resilient products. We're also doing the tropicals and subtropicals. We have many climate ready traits in our plants at the moment already. We're doing a lot of research looking at flowering and chilling requirements around New Zealand to ensure that pollination and plants can occur. And we're also breeding fish for a warmer ocean. So a case study that I'm passionate about because I'm heavily involved in it is the Hot Climate Partnership. So the Hot Climate Partnership is a pip fruit breeding program based north of Barcelona in Spain, which seems a little abstract, but as I get into it, we'll see its relevance for Hawke's Bay soon. Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of Plant and Food Research, Venture Fruit, who are a subsidiary of T&G, based in Whakatu, Urta, who are essentially the Spanish version of Plant and Food Research, and Fruit Future, who are a grower co-op. So I've touched on this, but the warming climate is an obvious concern for agriculture and horticulture. It's certainly no different for the pip fruit sector. Growers and producers have been noting that growing regions are becoming hotter, not just hotter during the day, but there's been loss of diurnal temperature variation, so warmer nights, meaning certain fruits aren't colouring up, which is a big concern for an export market like ourselves. It's a serious concern for the industry growing here now, but 20 years ago, it was already a serious concern in Spain. So the origins of this breeding program were that, even as early as the early 2000s, it was getting warmer in Spain. It's not uncommon now for summer temperatures to be well into the 40s. Apple and pip fruit production is really key for that area, as it is for Hawke's Bay. And they were seeing almost no coloration of their fruit due to the rising temperature. You could buy a Fuji or Gala apple, that would be very yellow. So Urta came to Plant and Food Research New Zealand with this challenge and asked us if we could co-invest in a breeding program. So this has led to what we call the cultivar development in a warming climate. over there we are breeding for high quality apples and pear varieties that can colour up and produce a great temperature in a warmer climate. At the time it was just for Catalan growers, but as climate change has progressed rapidly around the world, it has become an increasingly important future program for New Zealand and Hawke's Bay especially. Just last year, we saw the release of the first commercial variety out of that program. It's known as Tutti. Tutti colours up fantastically and has great texture at temperatures upwards of 40 degrees Celsius. Really excitingly for us, it's about to come into New Zealand through our quarantine system and will be propagated at high numbers and offered to growers through Venture Fruit's commercialisation partner. So it's a tangible product of a climate-focused breeding program overseas that we've helped enable and solve a problem there. We're now bringing back to help Kiwi growers. It's something we're very proud of. So apart from that program, what else are we doing? So in the cropping industry, we operate a program called Sustainable Vegetable Systems. So there's some dedicated scientists based in Hawke's Bay doing really fantastic work, assessing nitrogen levels and other levels, and seeing how they're influenced by different factors across the food chain. There's trial sites all across New Zealand, and it's focusing on a really diverse range of crops. We are really hopeful that this is going to develop into a commercial tool that we can give to growers and farmers so that they can be sure that they are reducing nitrogen as much as possible, given that that's going to be a likely requirement for them moving forward. We've also launched the Authentic Taonga Foods program. I'll just bring up. That's on this. Sorry. Oh, apologies. Trying to access my notes. Here we go. Here they are. So this is a new initiative led by a new team within Plant and Food Research called the Māori Strategic Partnerships and Engagement Team, led by Stacey Whittiorda in Auckland. So this program, I'm not an expert in it, but I was excited to share it with you. It's only been announced in late December. But the vision behind it is that, by the year 2050, that there'll be a flourishing Taonga-based food and bio-based sector within New Zealand. And that's something that's going to contribute significantly to the well-being of communities and offer a unique exporting offering to global consumers who are increasingly inclined towards ethical and environmentally friendly products. So this direction, this platform is aiming to be an authentic research partnership opportunity between Plant and Food Research and Tangata Whenua for the interaction between Indigenous and mainstream science knowledge systems. So whilst it's in its early stages, the goal is that some of our scientists will be working with Māori communities to identify some of their taonga species and unique opportunities they have within there and help develop them as best possible. Yield isn't always an important thing when we're talking about commercial growing, especially within Hawke's Bay. So we are working really hard on finding new ways to improve yield within acceptable tolerances. So Hawke's Bay, especially globally, is known for producing really high yielding apple varieties. And now we're focusing on systems. So the Future Orchard Production System, which you can see in this image up here, is a project that was focused on increasing the efficiency of fruit production for minimal land use and reduced inputs. And it's going to be crucial for the longevity and sustainability of our fruit industry in Hawke's Bay. So the system is designed to optimize light usage. And in doing so, the modeling and our test block has shown that in some cases it can be the yield can be twice as much as a conventional system for anecdotally at this stage at least, less water usage. We're also working on lots of other tools, so decision-making tools to help growers on grape yield, potato yield, and pollinization optimization. And although not direct climate mitigation, I thought it was important to touch on our work in the cyclone response area. So we've been involved in the immediate response with scientists immediately going out and helping on upwards of 30 orchards. We've been working with industry to see what we can possibly do to save trees. And we are continuing to invest in conducting research on water and silt impact. We actually just had a news story published in the last few days of one of our scientists who has been trialling different vegetable and other crops in areas of high silt where it's not economical to take away the silt and determine what is best for those orchardists. Which is, I think, important work. So that is the high-level summary. My parting offer is that, you know, I come from a site of 70-odd scientists, and they're all desperate to tour people around and to introduce you to the things that they do, and they would love to have either this whole group or the communities you represent come and visit. I am open to taking back feedback and questions on anything. I'm not an expert on all these areas, but I'd love to share knowledge as best possible.
Yeah, kia ora, Luke. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's actually really insightful understanding the international perspective, particularly around 40 degrees and what's going to ripen and not.
Yeah.
So I suppose relative to Hawke's Bay and the trends that you're seeing internationally with rising temperatures, you know, what at a high level can you tell us about Hawke's Bay and the trajectory we're going in terms of, let's just say, apple growth?
First of all, given the disclaimer, I'm not an expert in this area. We do have experts in this area at my site, so I'm aware of their work. And modelling work is unsurprisingly showing that it will be warming within Hawke's Bay, and in decades to come, growing the conventional varieties that we grow is going to become increasingly challenging. That's why, in part, this program in Catalan has been a bit of a blessing to New Zealand, because we're going to be able to bring back varieties that will, in theory, continue to enable success in the region.
Yeah. Really important work. Thank you. Are there any other comments or feedback for Luke? Yeah.
I've been for the tour and met everybody, and certainly we've seen the incredible work that's going on. Recommend everybody to make a time. It's very reassuring to think that we are considering what we're going to be growing in our region in the future. So thank you, Luke.
Yeah, thank you. I think of the Tato block with apples on it and the way that their systems have changed. So we've got a lot of PSGEs in the room that might be really interested in getting in contact with you and the team, understanding what innovation looks like going forward.
Yeah, we're definitely welcome it.
Kia ora, then.
Thanks, Luke. I've also had the benefit of the tour recently through that FOPS, the Future Orchard Production System, with Ken Breen and some of his colleagues.
Oh yeah, great.
It was really insightful. And yes, the yields that these kind of systems can achieve are phenomenal. I'm just interested in your insights on the question of productivity and producing food and the Hawke's Bay. So my interpretation of what you're saying is all about two things. One is ensuring that we can produce in future, but also continue to increase efficiency of production and outright production for a world that's going to need more food.
Yeah.
That is, how do you see that in the context of the challenge of about, looking after our soils, managing our water, that kind of thing? What insight can you give, and in the kind of climate context? Is there any wise words that you've got for us there?
I think you've summed up the challenge really well. That's why incorporating a multitude of breeding targets into our various breeding programs is so important. Our programs don't just chase yield, and we don't just have scientists based solely on those topics. We try and apply a more holistic view, but moving forward, that's definitely going to become much more important. And especially when we're working in territories like Europe, who are more aggressive around regulating things like fertilizer and spray usage than we currently are in New Zealand. We're seeing partners that we work over there already under massive pressure for what they can and can't use out in the field. And that's coming back to us and messaging that our breeders need to have more innovation. So something I haven't touched on is that we perceive climate change accelerating at such a rate now that our conventional breeding systems that we've used for a very long time aren't quite quick enough. So the apple that I referred to, Tuti, and that took 18 years to go from first crossing to a marketable apple. If we're using the conventional systems, we probably aren't going to be able to keep up with the pace at which climate change is moving, and that's why we are investigating how we apply novel breeding technologies as best possible.
Yeah.
But that's very stretchy, very expensive science, but we are doing it.
Right. Thank you so much, Luke. That was really insightful and a little bit scary. But 19 years to breed Tuti. But like really important for us to consider when we think about food security going forward in the climate we're going to live in. So thank you so much for your presentation. Hopefully some in the group can come and do some tours.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Hope it's not all scary. These programs are established, so there's a big pipeline of stuff coming. It's just about ensuring it keeps moving forward.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we need a 2-minute break? Yep. Okay. There's some hot drinks and a wharepaku stop, and we'll be back. Thank you. Thank you.
It's what they really keep it down. Yes, yes. They use a lot of treatment of everything. And I'm just sitting there going,
It's all right. You all right?
yeah, that's all I'm thinking. That's why we've got to try and fight for their bloody olive to their fame. At least it's organic, and I think, yeah, it's and it's already an established orchard. All it needs to be done is free.
How's things going with the stakeholder group?
I'm working on the cultural assessment with all the tohunga, so it's keeping me busy. That's why I was a bit late. I was interviewing one and one.
It's important work to
But
along.
so I'll see what comes out of this weekend. We've got a much people coming through, so it'll be interesting to see what he's.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah.
That stakeholder group be, come to 2 viable options.
Oh, in my
Do you
mind
think?
there is only 2, but I don't know. We're gonna even bring some other options. 8 months visiting with ops, going over
them,
options,
yeah. And there's no
So there's-
magical one we're missing.
No,
That
there
really
isn't. I think
doesn't
there's
happen,
only 2.
Yeah.
There's only
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's water because it detracts from
Yeah.
progressing.
Yeah. No, it does. I just hope as far as I'm concerned, just carry on.
No, we have to.
Yeah. And because we've reached that every possible option, and in the end, the only other thing which I was pleased with, they swerved away from the marae.
Yeah.
And it's the 3rd one of that area. So
Yeah.
So we're aiming for to try and get everything done, but it might be just like we need to have things for other things.
Yeah, 26.
It just depends on now, right? They're all busy doing it.
Yeah.
They're all onto it now, and my job's coordinating all them.
Yeah.
And doing everything else.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We'll get there. And then it's like, as I was saying, then it's going to go through everything possible.
Yeah.
Because of the enormity of it.
Yeah.
What to get wrong. You know, so then I can say, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a huge river.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
trying to control.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you concerned about this land I'm hearing about having priority? Are they, or are they not on the other side of the river?
Having priority.
Yeah.
That's nothing, no concerns came up there. I don't know what farm
about
having priority.
Or is that part of the mix, like the farm would be flooded, it's fine if we need to. Well, no, well, I mean,
You've
as a
gotta help.
secondary, you know, what opposed to people's houses, I mean, you know. Yeah, they go, you can't prioritise
because it was,
farmland over houses.
yeah, so it was like the you know, the one option.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, because go into the hui and go, oh, where's, because Charlie's going, well, why you look at 17, you look at, you know, many houses. And okay. And so it gave us the opportunity to push that one up on the table too. But yeah, I don't know. That's about it. I felt like there was something going on to try and protect some farms.
Yeah.
And I said, be careful what you do. Reasonably.
I've been thinking about that whole meeting.
Stop things here. You're going to inundate us.
Yeah.
You're going to inundate another, and you got a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think,
To me, if it was naturally there, leave it as it is.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I was thinking that some of the stuff is
I'm
just pure
waiting
government.
for.
A lot of we talk about
Sorry, what's my
Yeah, yeah.
We would
Yeah.
have to-
How start do you want
and
to go?
maybe you know, not
All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna
we-
try and get us through quicker with this. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Thanks,
it.
Lee.
Yeah, got to look at another.
I know, so I might
Yeah,
be just
no,
executive summary and questions.
That might be.
For example, I think we could have got more detail in those priority areas for biodiversity. So that people who claim mana whenua in certain areas could actually see the point. And almost throwaway comments about we've engaged with them, stuff like that. So one of those things. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not obvious. And then you can get reaction from. Oh yeah, that's fine. Well, we don't know what they're doing.
Bye-bye. Kia ora, welcome everyone. Hopefully you've got your coffee. So if everyone's happy, we'll have an executive summary of the rest of our items so we can try and finish on time. But yeah, please throw key questions out when they come. So our next paper is around the natural hazards gap analysis. So Pip, can you please run us through this quickly and then we can have some questions answer time.
Kia ora, sure. So just 3 slides just to set the scene. Take the paper as read, but this comes from, again, the 11th of December Joint Committee meeting requesting more information on what we know currently about coverage, scope, date of data for natural hazards in the region. You might recall also in our May meeting last year, Dr. Tom Logan from Urban Intelligence came and presented on screen the Resilience Explorer, which is an example of a spatial-based platform where you can display multiple hazards at the time and vulnerabilities. So that was something we were investigating at that time. And just on this slide, I really do want to take a second to remind you also of the change in legislation that occurred December 2022. Local government must have regard to the National Adaptation Plan and to the Emissions Reduction Plan when preparing or changing regional policy statements, regional plans and district plans. So the emissions reduction plan just also will be revised this year. We're waiting for version 2 to come out of that. And I was just mentioning with Paulina that there's hundreds of actions in that document, and about a quarter of them mention local government as the as responsible for the action actually. So doers, not just being abreast of. We actually have actions against that central government expect of local government. So for some reason that doesn't want to go. this is just a really brief reminder, and but this document came out last week. So it's just to highlight that there's a bit of a changing understanding of climate change risk, that we have a hazard. So in the dark blue on the bottom left of that, that diagram, we have a hazard, and over time under climate change, hazard frequency and probability increases. But your risk is also, we need to define a risk, we need to take into account exposure, which can be mitigated, and vulnerability, which can be mitigated. And those things change over time too. So I highlight that because in the past, some of our approach to hazard knowledge in the region has really focused on the hazard and not the overall vulnerability exposure. So that's when we talk about resilience, that's got to take into account a community's ability to respond. And we know that it's not equal under climate change. So it's a changing picture. This document comes from a MFE document on coastal hazards that was released last week. So the second point there, again, we do have really clear guidance from the MFE, from the Ministry for Environment, that we should use multiple climate change scenarios in our modelling. What that means is we take a low emissions profile, like let's say we manage to reduce emissions and slow down climate change, hazards, frequency and likelihood will decrease. So we could base on that assumption. Let's say we do nothing and emissions continue to increase, the likelihood and the frequency of that hazard goes up. So in terms of our scope, we need to be taken into account both. So we have some really clear guidance, and not all of our data, which is what we highlight in the paper, follows that kind of guidance. It's not up to that sort of 2024 standard right now. This is just a summary. You have it in the paper, but what we did is took all the hazards that are mostly, like Mayor Walker highlighted before, on the Hawke's Bay Hazards portal. This was reviewed. I reviewed those individually with our science experts at HBRC. I have not had the time to go out to the district council experts, but I have been internally with my colleagues and with CEDAM. They were ranked then with the help of Steffi Reeves-Bird from HDC, who's just had to jump off online, I think, but we ranked them against the CEDAM risk register. So that's the table you have with kind of a colour from red to orange. And you have an indication of what we think the coverage is from low, medium or high, and across those 4 districts within the region. Conclusions, I could mention those or we can have discussion, but the conclusions that we came up with is that there is this common program of work in climate change, hazard identification, modelling, risk measurement, and we really need this between council and within council common work program. We do, as you've highlighted earlier in today's hui, we need some clear governance of it. Who has oversight of this, who owns it, who funds it, and what are those collective user requirements, because we all have a common part of work, but we have different needs as well. So it would be good to get an understanding of that. But we do need this thorough regional climate change risk assessment, taking into account future projections, not backwards looking projections, and taking into account vulnerability of communities and current exposure. So the idea of this information is that it's like a stepping stone onto what do we know now, what don't we know, what do we need to know, in summary. So happy to take questions.
Thank you, Pippa. Really important work that we need to get on with. So I'm interested in the MFE information that came out last week. Does that provide guidance of implementation for our teams across the councils to embed in the way that we collect the data? And do we have up-to-date tools in the portal? That's the second question.
The guidance that came out last week is specifically related to coastal hazards, and it relates to more process of how to establish community values are an important part of it, that they highlight establishing values, tolerance levels, and then going into the scientific modelling. So it's more about process. The portal, the Hawke's Bay Hazards portal, as I think for those of you on KEG met about 10 days ago, you will have been advised that there's a need to update that software. So there does need to be a program of work, and that program I think is looking for a home or looking for which parties are interested in collaborating on that.
Further questions? I'll go Hayley first and then Alex.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking at the hazard risk rating, and you've done it through a CDM lens. I'm conscious that we also have like an infrastructure. So it's not necessarily, the threat isn't necessarily a civil defence response. It could be increasing water levels that then impact on our infrastructure. So there's like the long burn and then there's the emergency risks. How are we going to capture that?
So I think we do capture it in like the full table. So the justification for those low, medium, high is in this Word document that was an attachment. So you do have drought, you do have increasing salinity of groundwater, and which those things don't occur. Well, sorry, increasing salinity of groundwater does not occur on the CDM risk register because you're right, it's not an emergency. It wouldn't incur an emergency response. So yeah, liquefaction, water availability, cyclonic activity, marine heat waves is a great example, or biodiversity loss. That's a climate risk, but it's not a CDM risk.
Right, so it's captured. That's what you're saying. Yeah, cool.
And that, yeah,
cool.
Me, Alex.
I actually, this is really great, thank you. And actually comes back to a priority that had come up in civil defence 3 or 4 years ago about how we better getting across the connection with risk with planning and around where development and zoning and stuff is happening. So I think we're asking the right questions in terms of who owns the data, who governs the data, who's responsible for the integrity, how is it used, how does it cover infrastructure, how does it cover planning, how does it cover natural hazards risks for district plans, how does it cover civil defence risks? I think those are all exactly the right questions. We don't necessarily have the structure that answers that question yet, but probably is a responsible partnership conversation between this committee and the Civil Defence Joint Committee, to be honest, in the first instance, as to how we create that. But if we're also putting the climate change engine behind it, not just the civil defence engine, we're going to make so much more progress. So you've landed kind of where I think we knew the conversation was, which is it's mucky, but we need to sort it out.
Yeah.
And now we've got the opportunity to sort it out.
Any further questions, Ros? No. Your hand's still up. Okay, thanks, Pippa. Can I have a mover and a seconder just to receive the information item? Thank you, Sandra. And Paul, thank you. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. We've got Napier City Council natural hazards paper next, but I do note that the presenter is unwell today.
Paulina is going to
she's
present.
happy to present. Okay, thank you. Do you want to do slides? No. Great. So this covers Napier City Council's natural hazards, the issues and options consultation. Was that through the district plan change?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So this might be useful for our other TAs, and obviously Central Hawke's Bay's already gone through theirs, but it brings light to the issues you had around those natural hazard planning aspects. Thank you.
Yes, so in summary, I just want to reiterate, we notified, as a way of background, we notified the proposed district plan in September last year. And at that time, we left the management of natural hazards outside of the district plan. The reason was to be able to have sufficient time to assess the impacts of the Cyclone Gabrielle, and also to extend the engagement with our Mana Whenua partners that at the time were very busy with this response and recovery functions. So we are at the stage where we are doing engagement with the community at the moment, and that will last throughout the month of March. And we have developed the issues and options paper for managing natural hazards. As you know, Napier is exposed to a whole range of hazards, basically all hazards that you can think of. So it's very vulnerable for them from that perspective. The approach that Napier City Council have taken in the past is to mitigate natural hazards, because if we really want to avoid them, we wouldn't be able to grow anywhere in Napier. So there are no free areas of hazards within Napier. There's some kind of hazard everywhere. So that poses a real challenge for catering and providing future growth. But as I said, there are mitigation measures that can be put in place to allow the safe development of Napier in the future. So we are encouraging feedback from the community. There would be some open days that we're holding during this month. We're going to assess the risk appetite from the community and then being able to develop the policy direction that will be presented to the our councillors by the end of May. Are there any questions related to that?
Any questions on this paper? No. There are none. Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Would you like to move, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, happy to move.
And a seconder? Anyone? Councillor Harding? All those agree to accept, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Yes, carried. That was quicker than I thought. So, we have our last item now, which is the Regional Community Carbon Footprint Update. Thank you.
This item is actually our senior climate scientist, Dr. Narifa Abraham Bennett. She has prepared this and prepared the slides, but she's unwell today. So you've got me. So I'll just share that. If that's working. Yeah, so Narifa has prepared the paper for you. There's just a couple of slides. So the methodology, she explains here the global protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emissions. So what we're talking about here is not council emissions. This is community, regional greenhouse gas emissions. Those categories that it includes are defined by the method: energy, so electricity, in essence, transport, waste, industrial processes and product use, agriculture and forestry. So we will look at gross and net emissions. So we will look at sequestration. The Narifa has used the most recent emission factors, activity data and methodologies. So we do thank all the council staff involved in providing this information to our team. Your wastewater teams, your landfill teams have all provided data. And this is the update. Down the bottom there, you have the pictures, the cover pages of the reports that were prepared by those consultants from ICOM, and they were delivered in 2022, and they did 3 years of emissions. So just as a reminder, we had those 4 reports and a regional report prepared in 2022. This is the update. And so the overall emissions that we have, so that's 4.3 million tonnes, 4,340 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent. What that means is it includes carbon dioxide and methane. The profile doesn't change very much from the previous year. So 2/3 relates to agriculture, mostly biogenic methane, and our second category is transport. On the right there, you see the trends. There's no real difference. We can't consider those small changes to be outside of the margin of error of the methodology. We have a very large 23.8 tonnes of carbon dioxide per person per year. There are guidelines out there that indicate that to stop global warming, we should be at 2.3 tonnes per person per year across the world. So that's the size of the difference. Yeah. Europe, the UK is about 7 tonnes per person per year. So there are countries where they're managing to reduce this significantly. Our per capita emissions are very high. This is a breakdown that Narifa has prepared here to show you, like within that large category of agriculture, which is 2/3 because of the global warming power of methane. It's a third of it is sheep, coming from sheep farming, and then non-dairy cattle, dairy cattle, and other. Within the energy sector, so transport comes within the energy sector, but so it's mainly transport and then stationary energy, so mostly electricity from the grid. Waste is only 2% of our regional profile. Now this is just to show the, so our gross emissions are up there at about 4,340. What is the black diagonal lines show you what is being absorbed by forestry. Now that is, because we've had some conversations about sequestration today, we know that the ocean absorbs carbon, we know that the soils absorb carbon, wetlands, shrubs in your garden absorb carbon mostly, but this is what's measured by the ETS. So our forestry within the region absorbs around 2/3 of our emissions. We have 1/3 left. To reach something like carbon neutral, you would have those bars overlapping. That is the trend over time. For on the top level there, our gross emissions, everything that's being emitted from our production in the region, and when we take into account sequestration, it lowers down there. So again, those changes are not really significant, large enough to be considered a downwards nor an upwards trend. That's probably a dip because of COVID, but so.
And drought.
Yes, and drought. That is, yes. So that's a great segue, because here we have just some trends that we have identified. There's an increase in our agricultural emissions by 6%, which is just under really the margin of error of these models and these emissions factors, but that's probably related to a bounce back after years of drought, because this relates to the 2021 to 2022. The only one that's really significant is the one I've put in a square box there, because so a 21% decrease in stationary emissions from electricity. That's primarily because our grid was was more efficient. It had more renewables in it because we had more water. So we had more rain, we had more water in the hydro. So that is really something out of our control as a region. But so that's the change all over the country. So yeah, no overall change. There is this increase in sequestration in Central Hawke's Bay of around 57%. So that's a really positive note. We think it's related to less harvesting that occurred in this year. An increase in transport in Wairoa, that's kind of on that cusp of significance as well, relating to petrol and diesel sales. And those are the key points. Agriculture and transport, main contributors, no change there. Emissions are not reducing in line with the reductions we need if we are going to achieve the goal of carbon neutral by 2050. And these are the strong and difficult changes we require in the more challenging sectors of agriculture and transport, as previously discussed. But I do want to highlight here too that because we all represent different areas, district profiles are very different. So the challenges and opportunities are going to differ. And what I asked for Narifa to provide, which I won't present, but just to highlight that it is in your slides, she has prepared a profile for Napier, a profile for Hastings, Wairoa, and Central Hawke's Bay. So, I mean, we can, if you wish to go into those, we can, but they are in your slides so that you can use that. And Narifa or myself, we're very happy to talk to these results, to share these results, to help you understand them or to present to other people.
Thank you, Pippa. Really valuable. I think each one of the districts and cities that are represented in this room could take away this data and maybe have it presented if that's what you choose to do, or even at our PSGEs to show what the profiles look like in each of our regions. I think it's highly valuable. Questions for Pippa? Yeah, Alex.
Pippa, is it possible for us to look at some of the key headlines of this at longer than a 3-year period? So I know that we have dug deep into analysing the carbon emissions over a 3-year period, but if we look at some of the drivers, so if we go agriculture and transport are the biggest drivers currently, and so we've got stock units will be one part of that. Human population and number of cars will be another part of that. To actually look what the trend is over a longer period, Because just you've pointed out really clearly in that 3 years, like there's some blips in there that make things look like they're going up and down. Transport went down because of we all stayed home for quite
Yeah.
a few months in
Yeah.
COVID, and then it came back and we had the drought, which saw stock numbers come down. But if we look at over a 20-year period, stock unit numbers have gone down, forestry area has
Yeah.
gone up, population has gone up, number of vehicles has gone up. And so we then look at where the trends go on a longer time, because it's really dangerous and that's just a 3-year trend. So
Yeah.
is it possible to look at a kind of picture?
Well, so we only started measuring it last year. So we gave the consultants the scope to go back before COVID and to give us those 3 years. We do have estimates from Stats New Zealand that go back as far as 2007. So that is data I can bring to you. It uses a slightly different methodology. But yeah, we can bring that data. But as a region, we haven't been gathering that information over that time. We've been, Stats New Zealand does it nationally, and then they produce a regional indicator with a slightly different method.
Okay. It's just I know things like numbers of stock units of sheep, beef and dairy in the region have come down by about a third in the last 10 to 15 years. So we're actually on a trajectory of
coming down
emissions over a longer period of time, and the trajectory for others are going in a different way. So in terms of that, how do we decide on action and focus areas? We've got to have a look at that kind of longer trend as well. So that would be helpful context for me anyway.
Go there, yeah. Kia ora, Zen.
Kia ora, Chair. Firstly, I just endorse Mayor Alex's comments. Look, and in the context of the methane, the national methane target of 24 to 47% reduction, chance the region might already be there based on the trends over the last 10 years. But we don't know. So my first question, Pippa, is, and just relates to that slide. So recently, I'm unfortunately missed the clash in Pika, kicking off a regional agency, a regional energy transition accelerator. Now my understanding would be that probably that initiative is probably looking at the 8% stationary energy.
Yes.
I'm not sure that that was industrial processing products.
No, you're right. It is in stationary energy. Yeah. So this accelerator will bring a lot of regional information. So primarily, it's the energy used in Hawke's Bay is piped LPG for in this area, and it's used in food production. So companies like Sedenco or food, when they have to heat it to make it sustainable on the shelf. So yeah, Rita will be working with each of those companies, looking at when it becomes economically viable for them to move from whatever source they're using. For example, if they were using coal, but we have very little coal use in the region, to switch to LPG and to move from LPG to renewables, mostly solar. So yeah, that is really exciting that they're launching that. It could, I think it's like 5 to 10% of, because it's always a different chunk, but it comes in within that stationary energy, yeah.
So supplementary question there, would it be appropriate to do a paper or even a presentation to this committee about that initiative? Because it's a biggie for our potential, and it's addressing one of our home.
Yeah, yes, I was at that kickoff hui, and I've met with the Oliver from ECA a couple of times, but I think it would be great for them to bring the results to this committee, because they really are working with those companies to say, when does it become economically viable? One of the people at the hui was saying their energy bill went up by $1 million. They just had to renegotiate. So that's the kind of cost they're looking at. So all of a sudden, solar panels on their roof, even if their roof needs reinforcing, becomes economically viable. But their energy bill was so enormous that the increase was $1 million.
So I'd say this is the kind of activity we should be vitally interested in, pulling levers to make sure it's successful.
Yeah, we can bring that. I feel like that's about August, September, the release that they expect to have the results. So we could note that to bring it to you guys.
Great, that presentation. Any other questions for Pippa? Comments? Zen, another one.
Sure, Chair. So getting to comments now, and look, I wonder whether it would benefit the carbon footprinting, whether it would benefit breaking out biogenic methane from our carbon or from anything else, and it aligns it with Alex's points about the change in stock numbers. Also, if we did that, then we may escape from some of the gnarliest arguments about whether the methane production is additive or whether, just how much of it we need to eliminate, because it's a short-lived gas, and there's a regional level that our stock runs down, and that may change our sense of priority around. But I'd say more than that, I think to separate, to be reporting that methane separately when we're trying to tell our high-level regional story, I think would set us up to have better conversations with the community. So the two big changes I would like to see in the way we're reporting our community footprint is that one, and secondly, the story that we're telling and the state of information we have around forestry and the sequestration, because that's a benefit to us at the moment, but we know virtually nothing about it. And that makes, and if we're trying to manage, then that's a huge vulnerability. So it's so important for the region, it's so intrinsically linked to land use change and agriculture that I think it deserves focus and understanding. And like anything, once you start focusing on it, you start thinking about how you can influence it.
I think those are really good aspects. I question how easy it is to collect that type of data. I'm saying it's a good idea, but is it realistic? What does that look like? The question is.
Like, part of primary sector. So I mean, we have a primary sector PO, and forestry is logically part of that. So to have,
but to PIPA and the tag, just capturing the data and bringing it back.
Yeah, it's going to get difficult to start presenting data on something that's not monitored or measured. We have the ETS carbon, a forestry that goes into the ETS then gets measured for its carbon sequestration. If we're talking about things that are not yet included in the ETS, we would struggle to get that really robust data.
Yeah, sorry, just to develop my point. My point is if we're engaging with the main forestry operations in Hawke's Bay and agricultural industry, then they can give us the data with our footprinting. They know, they can tell us. They know what
we can.
Michelle?
So, Chair, I'm just trying to understand why we would exclude the agricultural emissions.
Not excluding them, but just reporting them separately so that we can understand.
No.
Yeah.
So that we can engage in conversation.
So that's separating the methane and carbon.
And it aligns with a national report, a separate target for methane.
At the national, yes, the national goal is a split gas goal. Methane has different targets. Regionally, we stay carbon neutral by 2050. So it's we certainly have the data because you have to go through that process. And the reason why I've brought this up is this is pretty much what Hawke's Bay's footprint would look like if we were to measure biogenic methane separately. We would be talking about transport as over half of the profile. So
It's not the main emitter.
But also
I don't like the sound of that. It sounds like you're just trying to hide it away. And I'd like to see what the decrease in stock is. I like to see the numbers because I suppose with that thing, when you have stock, you have to be registered because of TB. So I'm sure they're deriving their numbers from that. And I'd like to see what the decrease is, because if you're decreasing stock, say in Central Hawke's Bay, you wouldn't need the dam, would you? Because you got less stock. And I'd like to see the facts So I'm sure that you're deriving that from the TB figures of stock because they have to be registered and tagged. So that information would be, you could get current information on how much stock there is in Hawke's Bay. And with the forestry, there's plenty of information around there. You see where all the forestries are and how many hectares that is and how many pine trees they grew and blah, blah, blah. So I'm sure that's derived from factual information, but trying to remove agricultural emissions from that graph. Doesn't sound right to me. That's
No,
not taken
it would
from
be
me.
included, but then within it divided into two specific areas, but definitely agriculture stays. Yep. Councillor Roadley.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to endorse Mayor Alex's comments around PIPA if there's an opportunity to look at a longer term view. When I read your report, I was scratching my head about the 6% increase, knowing what we know about the significant reduction in stock numbers across the whole district. PIPA, is it possible? I mean, you talked about it would be difficult, given that we haven't been monitoring it, but does that mean it's impossible or is it something you can navigate?
So just am I clear? You would like a council office to go back and look at numbers of stock across the region, so to like get so that just the indicator for agricultural stock numbers, but to look back? Is this? I assume it's possible. I know that emissions factors change because we get better science about how to estimate how much methane is produced by one sheep, by one cow, etc. But as if the data exists nationally, we can go and look at it. The other option is I could easily present to you what Stats New Zealand measure and predict. So it's either a piece of work that we may or may not be able to do depending on how good the national source of data is, and a bit of work to go on and find the Hawke's Bay specific. But we're also looking back. We're looking backwards. Otherwise, Stats New Zealand, that's like we could quickly put together indication of what it was like since 2007.
I think we use information we have, to do that, to paint that longer term picture. And if you can with stock numbers, there's obviously ask there for that as well.
I think the data is pretty easy to find off Beef and Lamb New Zealand. They've got it regionally. And I whilst I concur that it's looking back's not always the optimum, but as far as looking for trends, and there's a bit of a looking back to go forward, I think it would give a better picture of what's actually happening, particularly given that that is the biggest area of concern. It's probably worth getting a bit of a better picture before we create some targets there, if that's possible.
Haley. Kia ora. Just noting in paragraph 19.4 of your presentation, there was the 5 highest emission sources, and just a bit of a plug from me of the marine freight. I'm really interested in, so that's at 4% for us for regionally. I'm really interested, and it'll probably come through our transport chapter, I'm thinking, where a project in that space might help, because my background as a marine engineer, my understanding is it's a pretty, basically we need a big substation at the port, and we could basically get rid of that 4% because it's heavy fuel oils being burnt when a ship is alongside because they need to run their generator. But if we could provide them with clean green electricity from our windmills, we could basically knock that 4% out. Now that is coming from me at a very high level, making it very simplistic. But the other thing that could provide is, they use the equivalent of 10% of Napier's power sitting out there all on heavy fuels. So in an emergency, if we had that substation, they could power our CBD and a good chunk of houses. So I'm really keen to see where projects like that don't sit within councils, how we as a committee can advocate for things like that. So just a challenge for I'm assuming it's a transport chapter?
Yeah, what would be, yeah.
Okay.
Or energy and infrastructure of the emissions reduction plan that we haven't developed that yet. Projects like the green hydrogen initiative that will be coming to your next meeting, that may, I'm thinking of the travel emissions of the marine, but rather than the energy, but yeah. So we will hear more of projects like this to transition to lower fossil fuel sources. But yeah, I've noted it. Yeah.
Ros.
Oh, I just wanted just to endorse Councillor Roadley's comments about New Zealand Beef and Lamb have really, really good information on the agriculture data. And I think that a lot, when I see particularly like the Wairoa district emissions, and I think it's quite misleading and to see that. So I think we just need to probably update some of that data and get it, squeaky tight. And I know that when Hawke's Bay Regional Council had the climate, the workshop a year or so ago, and there was a speaker who showed forestry, and it showed like the emissions throughout the country of who was emitting the most. And when you looked at the Wairoa district, we were actually very few in comparison to like the bigger cities. So I think, and that is because of the forestry factor. So somehow I think, forestry does need to be sort of, it needs to be balanced back into it when you're showing these graphs somehow.
Okay. And sorry, just to follow on from that too, Federated Farmers presented to us at a LGNZ meeting on the future for local government. And one of the things they talked about was actually the New Zealand sheep and beef that we produce here, even when they're exported all the way over to Europe, still have a lower carbon footprint than beef that is grown in the US and in Europe. And so I suppose we have to take into the macro consequences. If we try and reduce our numbers, we're actually increasing, like if we're a low carbon production and we decrease our output, then we are just pushing that onto higher carbon density growers. Yeah,
there's some research around that emissions bumping, there's a better word, but and there's 3 ways to measure your emissions intensity for agriculture. So per kilo, per dollar, or per acre, and only one of those we come out on top. On other measures we come out about sixth worst. So we'll just highlight that we do have enormous interest in this area, and there's multiple messages out there. So there are some national pieces of research to look at whether the emissions bump, what the impact of that might be. So if we were to, if the meat was to be reproduced elsewhere. So there's 3 measures of emissions intensity for dollar, acre, or kilo, and one of them we do come out on top, and that is the one that you will hear in context like that.
One other thing just to add in terms of how we continue to monitor this is our thinking in the forestry offset bit, because they're recognised in the ETS, so that's measurable. That doesn't necessarily mean that the carbon credits that are generated in the ETS from there are actually used to offset carbon emissions in Hawke's Bay. It's kind of a false picture, actually, because it's not directly an offset. Like in a geographic boundary, we can go, yes, we've got enough trees to offset, but it's not an actual offset.
No.
And so we just need to be careful around that, because potentially those carbon emissions from those trees are being used to offset someone else's pollution somewhere else in the country. So I just think we just need to keep that in mind in terms of the picture that we're creating with these graphs as well, when it comes to the net situation.
So there, I think, again, it may have gone to a workshop paper, but there was a proposal, a staff recommendation that when we talk about emissions, we focus on gross emissions, because it gets muddied by this talk of offsetting and aiming for neutral. And also, what do you do after you get to neutral? What do you do after 0, after 2050? So should we be focusing on where are our gross emissions? What are the trends in that area? and what might be some targets that we could work towards. That's why Narifa has chosen on the main graphs to actually just give you the gross emissions and to not be muddying it with that sequestration story that you're really really putting a finger on it there. That might be offsetting Nestle's or IKEA's. You know, like we have international investors who buy carbon credits in the New Zealand market.
Yeah. Hey, I'm just looking at our time, everyone, and next steps, Pippa.
So I'm hearing some conversations about, you know, the methodology and not quite sure how to take that, how to take that forward, because this Narifa, well, all the sources of the data and the updates which have been done this year are in the report. So I can give you more information about that. The proposal that we were putting to you was that Narifa would do this work like she's done here every year, and then every 3 years we would have external consultants which come at that cost, but we would produce a report where you could go and publicly also that would be available, so people can go and check where the sources come from. Right. This is just a ability for us to monitor it, to have these kind of presentations rather than a full report, but the sources and all of that, Narifa's a experienced scientist who can detail where all of those numbers come from. So if that's okay with you, that is what we would continue to do. So she's already working on the next update, working with staff to get the information, beef and lamb, all of the sources of national data. Yep. We can also bring you back data particularly on agriculture and stock numbers, and just look at how that's trending. That can be an item. But if you're happy with the overall approach, you would continue to get kind of graphic.
Thank you, Pippa. I think everyone feels comfortable about that. Okay, thank you. Can I have someone receive and accept the report? Thank you, Hayley. And also Zen. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Thanks, Pippa. That brings us to the end, and we have to bid farewell to you, Pippa. It's pretty sad, but good for your husband's whānau to have you back in Paris, and we welcome you back when that stint's finished. Bye. Kia ora tātou. Thank you all for being here, especially those who have travelled from afar. Matua, could we get you to please close our hui? Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Kia ora tātou. We ki te atu mangarongo ki te whenua whakaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. Āmene. E te matua kāraua. O te tūmanako ki ata whai koe. Ki ata whakarongo koe ki ngā whiriwhiri kōro tia mātou i tēnei ahi. E te matu e kōro tia tēnei huinga. Ki te awhine tia, ki te tiaki. Ki tauhara tia o mātou ngāhere, o mātou awa, o mātou moana, o te rā, tai o whānui o Matawa Māwe, e te mātua whakakahi a mātou tēnei kaupapa nui mō ngā tāngata katoa e noho ana kei runga. Ke tau ki a tātou katoa, te ata whai o tuko tātou ariki o Ukraiti, me te arahau te atua, ki te whiwhi tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake. Amen.
Amen. Kia ora matua. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tag.
Ka kite. All right.
Working hard. All right.
It's just disgusting being 18. Let's try and get that Stella working. Yes.
I gotta forget. I'm not recommending something. Have you been to listen to this? I'm going to do this. Oh, did you get your thing, Nathan? Yeah, my son's at home. Oh, it was happening at 1. Yeah, so they were doing it at 1 o'clock. Oh. To keep moving on to and construct and then also
Yeah, I actually got still on my phone. See if I just. Oh, what part would I do? I'm not just a laptop game. I think I had it something else. I think that's when I had that upgrade. I think Stella had a big upgrade a couple of years ago, 18 months ago. And it's on my phone. Still.
That's mine. Yeah, well, this is the thing because. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's yeah, yeah. Let me start saying, yeah. Yeah.
So, and then of course you've got, yeah.
Good reference. Yeah, how you it's a yes, and then we start from that main funds. Next, so make
Yes.
yes. Working all our strategic non-strategic assets. It's going to be going on. We're going to merging through damage. Right. And expected dividends and everything. But they still need. So the one is going to support to take tourism up and down.
Can we get it from our events?
Yeah.
Can we use income that's come from HBRIC around that investment to fund across the like, is it the engine room that can help that too? We are really grappling with how we can do this with safety. I know it's not pretty, not pretty.
And can you see it as how we go?
Potentially, it's actually,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I know, but if we say that it is, it is. Yeah. The problem is a bit of a chicken and egg though. So remember when it comes to our readers, what are we going to do on that chicken development review? Also tourism was working really well and the assessment at the time was actually, it's okay, it's working well. The RTO model is standing on its own to we don't need to work that. So that's been the position, but it's still operating. It's still operating right. So it feels like a bit backwards to go in a resource constrained environment, being where's the place to put it? Because actually the problem is the funding, not the structure.
So,